Clerk will call the roll.
Glenn Whitley, County Judge.
Here.
Roy Charles Brooks, Commissioner Precinct 1.
Present.
Devin Allen, Commissioner Precinct 2. Here. Gary Fickus, Commissioner Precinct 3.
Here.
J.D. Johnson, Commissioner Precinct 4.
Here.
Constitutes a quorum.
Our invitation today will be delivered by the Missions and Outreach Minister, Spencer Ross, from Northwest Church of Christ in Fort Worth. Thank you very much for coming out today. After the invocation, please remain standing for our pledges.
Good morning. Would you all join me in prayer? Our wise and loving Father, first I'd like to begin by saying thank you on behalf of all who have gathered here today. Father, thank you for the many and abundant blessings that you give us. Thank you for life itself, for the measure of health we need to fulfill our callings, sustenance, and for friendship. Thank you for the ability to be involved in useful work and for the honor of bearing the appropriate responsibilities. Thanks as well for the freedom to embrace you or the freedom to reject you. Thank you for loving us even so from your boundless and gracious nature. Father, we understand in Scripture you have said that citizens ought to obey the governing authorities since you established these very authorities to promote peace and order and justice. Therefore, I pray for the mayor, the court, the various levels of city officials, and in particular for this assembled council. I'm asking you that you would graciously grant them wisdom to govern amid the afflicting interest and issues of our time, a sense of the welfare and true needs of our people. Grant them a keen thirst for justice and rightness, a confidence in what is good and fitting, the ability to work together in harmony, and a personal peace in their lives and the joy in their task. I pray for the agenda set before them today. Please give an assurance of what would please you and what would benefit those who live and work around this in Tarrant County. It is in the name of Jesus prayers offered. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honoring the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to the Texas one state. We're going to have to work on that. Commissioner Johnson, you can't be delayed when you're doing that. That 30-second delay kind of messed us up there, J.D.
I didn't hear what you said, Judge.
We know. We'll talk later. Mr. Manius.
Thank you, Your Honor. Under the court, we can go to the agenda. I have several items as it relates to the agenda this morning. Under the County Administrator section, item 7A11. This deals with the HAVA grant, and we're going to ask that come off of consent. So I'd like to make a few announcements when we get to that particular point. We're going to take action on it, but we're just not going to do it under the consent agenda. Also under purchasing, item 7H1. This is bid 2020-146. This is a sale of recycled paper. There's revised court communication that is in your folder today as relates to that particular item. When we get to our section, of course, we'll be taking various things out of order, and we'll be talking a little bit more about the status of a couple of different items related to the COVID-19 issue. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Court members, you have before you the meeting of our regular meeting of May the 19th. Approval. We have motions. Do I have a second in there someplace? Second in there someplace? Okay, this is going to be a strange day. Any discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Y'all always have to figure out whether he's saying yes to yes or yes to yes. We understand that. But y'all doing a great job. I just want to tell you that. Court members, you have before you the consent agenda with the exception of item 11 under the administrator's report, which has been pulled off for discussion.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion to second. Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, now it's not released.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I wanted to share a couple of updates with you. One is the city of Grand Prairie is conducting COVID testing for Grand Prairie residents. It's regardless of your county. So we know that a portion of Grand Prairie is in Tarrant County. Tuesdays and Thursdays from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. by appointment only at Veterans Park Event Center parking lot at 925 Conover Drive. No walk-ups are allowed and no drive-ups, without appointment. There are some additional requirements and criteria, so you can visit the City of Grand Prairie's website. Then they're also taking appointments by calling or texting 1-888-766-6653 Monday through Friday, 7 to 8, and then on Saturday from 7 to 7. That does require registration. Again, you can visit the City of Grand Prairie's website, www.gptx.org, to find out more information. Then also this Thursday, continuing our very regular hosting of COVID teletown halls, we will be hosting a teletown hall for the Spanish-speaking community. And so we look forward to having Amanda Arizola, who serves on the JPS Board of Directors, to join us, as well as Alejandro Espinosa with Workforce Solutions of Tarrant County, and also Dr. Tanasia. That will be from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This Thursday, May 28th. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Manius.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. We're going to go ahead, like we've done for the last several weeks, and start with an overview presentation by the Public Health Director. Vinny.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the board.
Good morning, Vinny.
So we'll go over our briefing for COVID-19 this morning again. So just to kind of get you situational awareness, so we have this morning, total of 5,038 total cases in Tarrant County, with 61 new being reported today. And deaths are at 144, with no new deaths reported this morning. And then a recovered a number of 1,912, which is 78 new recoveries. So that's sort of the situational awareness update. As you know, we've got a testing effort underway with 3 locations, 2 in Fort Worth, 1 in Arlington. With the long weekend, there was a break for Monday. But overall, we've had about 8,300 people that have done their self-screening online using our website, covidtesting.tarrantcounty.com. And out of those, about 3,700 appointments have been issued. As you can see, today is kind of our biggest day for testing. Over 440 people have booked appointments in all 3 locations. Now, some of the location scheduling is changing as things are moving around. Arlington's going to a 2-day schedule, a Tuesday-Thursday schedule. And Fort Worth had a couple of changes as well. I think on this Thursday and Friday, they'll have 1 location running instead of 2, but they're trying to bring that back on a more consistent basis. So that's from a testing standpoint. As we discussed last time, the criteria are now pretty opened up, where people over 65, people with underlying health conditions, if you're a retail store clerk of any kind or retail worker, if you're a healthcare provider or a first responder, all are qualified to get a test with or without symptoms. Other folks, we're still asking that you have at least some symptoms or a valid exposure or things like that. After this, the only next step really remains is open it up to the entire public, and we're being a little judicious about how to titrate our capacity versus what the demand may be. So far, things seem to be going okay. So looking at COVID-19 trend information. So I've got some good news to share. Now we're almost 2-3 weeks into this trend that's declining. So this is COVID-like illness trend. Seems to be that end of April was where we had a peak. And then early May, we had a little second peak. But if you look at the trend overall, for the entire month of May, we're starting to come down. And the reason we wait till the end to say that for sure is because the most recent data is not always reported. So even if you take for that part into account, you're going to see that the trend is down. And the right chart is influenza-like illness versus COVID-like illness, and both are trending down. ILI, obviously, we're out of influenza season, so that's expected to be down. But COVID-like illness, the red line, is also trending down. Case trends are also starting to show the same. We had a big peak at the end of April. A lot of that was attributed to the Federal Medical Center and all the positives that came from that. But if you look at the overall trend, we've been trending down for the last several weeks here. But the most recent week or so, about 10 days, I would still wait for more data to come in. But overall trend looks down. Deaths trend, it's kind of hard to discern that with the line there, but it's kind of stabilized. We've had a few deaths reported. Every day or so, there's been 1, 2, 3 things like that. But there have been some big days. I think our highest day was a total of 12 deaths. When you look back at the date of death, the date of death occurring, I believe that was May 1st. But overall, we've kind of flattened out on a weekly basis. About 20 is the average for death reports as well. Hospital trends, the number seems to have stabilized. We're at above 200 for most days for the last several weeks now, but it's flattened out. We started to surge from mid-April until about early May, and then we've kind of held steady. So that's flattened out as well. And then the number of occupied beds, or by percentage, they're flattened out at about 6% as well for COVID patients in occupied beds. So that's where we are with all the hospital trends. So one of the questions that I get a lot being in public health is that now that things are reopening and people want to go out, how do I as an individual gauge the risk? Because there's been a lot of conversation that people need to kind of make that determination for their family. So there was an article in the media about this, and it was generated out of a graph or a pictorial that an epidemiologist generated at a university. And there's like all this color coding, but the safest thing still remains, stay at home with family. And if you really dig down deep, they've shown an elderly grandpa, with family around. The point being, seniors need to stay home as much as they can and avoid contact, being out in the public. So stick it around with close family. But things like, exercising, bicycling, just, taking a walk, they're sort of low-risk activities as long as you avoid contact with individuals. And then when you get into more social gatherings outside, they're a moderate risk activity, where there are people congregating together and playing, like in a park setting or in a pool setting. And then a high-risk activity would be indoor large gatherings. So that's kind of the gauge of how do you gauge a personal risk when you go out and engage in these activities. And this is just a further detail on what that is, but that's on the slide for folks to read. And with that, again, the messages remain the same, that staying at home as much as possible is the best strategy because social distancing is still our best tool. Wear a mask when you go out. And then seniors over 65 continue to stay home as much as they can and avoid unnecessary social contact. So that's where we are, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Denny, as you are well aware, we had the first death of a Tarrant County Jail inmate over the weekend. I understand that this was an older gentleman with underlying health conditions who had been in the jail, as I recall, since the end of February. My question is probably more appropriately directed to the Sheriff's Department. I'd like to know how this person was handled from book-in until his death in our county jail
Sure.
facility. I assume that he came in with COVID-19, that he was screened upon booking. Come on, Sheriff.
I was looking for. Thank you.
Please walk us through how you handled.
Well, I'll do the
This
best I can
case.
with what I have. Yes, sir. He came in February. He's been in our jail for about 90 days. He had 2 felony counts with no bond on each of them. And as usual, he was screened in. Whether he was a carrier at that point, we're not real sure. But as everybody was done, he was quarantined initially coming in, and apparently
14 days.
Yes, sir. And when he became positive, he was isolated until medical staff and under the care of JPS, and then he was moved to JPS. For the last 2 weeks, I believe he's been at JPS prior to this. And
Do you know offhand at what point he became positive and how you became aware that he was positive?
I do not, I couldn't say for exact date and time that he became positive. All I know is that when he exhibited symptoms, he was immediately moved to isolation and then on to JPS fairly quickly after that. And that was the call of our medical staff at the jail. And then once he got there, like I said, he was at JPS for 14 days, I believe. But we've been monitoring him very close, and at one time he was intubated and he came in and out, unfortunately.
Between his initial isolation and his exhibiting of symptoms and transfer to JPS, was he in a pod? How was he housed?
Well, if he was housed at TCC, he would have been either in a one-man or one-person cell or two-person cell while he was being what we call classification, which is that isolation when they first come into the jail. Mm-hmm. So he was in that, and there's been a lot of restriction on movement inside the jail. So he had little or no contact with other prisoners. And then when he exhibited conditions from then, that's when he was moved to total isolation and then to JPS, which was pretty rapid.
So he was never in a general population setting?
No, where he was mingling with 40 or 50 people, I don't believe he was ever in that situation. I'll have to double check that, but that's my understanding.
I wish you would.
Sure.
And it might be helpful if Benny would do some contact tracing, just so
Sure.
we can be certain
Absolutely.
that he did not expose. Well, we can be certain of who he might have exposed.
Right.
To,
Yes, sir.
to the virus.
Yeah, and we still have, this morning we have 42 people that are positive in the jail. Most of those are at Green Bay. And we've had a total.
They are isolated together.
Yes, sir. And being monitored by JPS. And we've had a total of 146 that have come up positive. And at one time we had 89 that were active. At the same time, we're down to 42. However, the jail standards, and they've already done it with the prison systems, and they're moving this way within the next couple of weeks. Jail standards will come in and test every prisoner that we have, and they will test all of our confinement personnel as well. And of course, we've had total right now 46 officers that have had COVID, and we still have 25 that are out and battling with it.
Have you had to deal with a situation where someone was a positive COVID or a suspected positive COVID who was released
Yes, sir.
How would that person have been released?
We have released a total of 5 people that we knew were positive. They'd served their time, they were ready to get out of jail. And at that time, we have standing orders from public health, and those orders are delivered to them on what they need to do and what their instructions are before they ever leave it. We try to connect them with family members or something like that where they know where they're going. But,
is there anyone who follows those individuals, monitors their positive status?
No, sir. We don't follow them out into the free world and see where they go and what they do. You know, they're free people at that point.
I didn't ask if you did it, Sheriff. I'm asking if the system does it.
Is I believe we turn all that information on where they say they're going and where they're saying they're going to be quarantined is over to public health, and they have been marvelous about following.
You provide public health with that information.
Absolutely. So we make sure that everybody's on. You know, we do that rapidly.
Thank you, Commissioner Briggs. You asked many of the questions that I had. One outstanding is how many inmates do we are currently hospitalized?
We have 5 that are at JPS currently, and I don't believe as of this morning that those 5 are to the point of ventilation, but we've had 5. And on that note, if I also may mention in that same breath, is that our confinement people who go in that jail every day is not only have we had several of them with COVID, but unbeknownst to them, they've carried that home. And we've had a spouse that has been in serious condition in the hospital. Sure. Over the weekend, we've had a special needs child that was in serious condition, and we thought we were on the brink of seriousness there. Praise be to God, she's home today, doing better. But, you know, while I'm very concerned with inmates and we're doing everything to mitigate it, we're also equally working even harder to make sure our people are safe.
Absolutely.
Well, I understand that the governor's continued no visitation for these facilities. How are folks able to communicate with their friends or family outside of the...
Well, they have several ways to do that. One of them is the people who have our phone contract. They very generously have allowed for 2 or 3 free phone calls a week where they can call home. They also have, we have the tablets inside the jails where the prisoners can text and communicate on those. You know, they can text back and forth with families. So we're allowing all of that to occur, of course, and encouraging that.
Okay, and so that communication hasn't been restricted in any way given the safety precautions that have to be taken?
No, it hasn't. Just visitation. Visitation is off. So, and every indication from the state is I don't know when that'll resume. Our protocols, I believe that it'll be post July 4th before we ever get to do that again, depending on where we're at then.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Did the individual who passed away, was he ever at Green Bay?
Judge, I don't know that. I'll have to double check that. I do not know. I don't
know
think
that
so.
It was, when did y'all report your first case? Wasn't it? I thought it was late into March.
I thought it was too, and the first hit was, you know, we had contractors that came in.
Right.
And in fact, the contractor, God love her and rest her soul, as she passed away. But all of those people have returned, and you know, I need to double check that. There's a possibility that he was at Green Bay, but I don't know that.
Because it sounds to me like in the timeline that you've outlined thus far that he was in general pop, and then came down with it. Because if he was here since the end of February, I think it was sometime in March that you set up your staggered, we're going to start quarantining everybody in groups as they come into the jail.
You're correct. It was early March when that came in. So there's a possibility that
he was already there.
Yeah. And
that he acquired it some way or another, maybe through the contractor, maybe through somebody else, but whatever, he was already in there from that standpoint.
Yeah, we had a total of 9 different contractors that entered that we know now were positive.
Okay. Thank you, Sheriff. Any other
Chess
questions?
game continues.
Thank you. Any other questions for Vinny? We have a couple of.
For Vinny.
You have a few for
I can
Vinny?
wait.
No, go ahead and let's get that taken care of.
Vinny, if you could just give an update on the FMC and then also the women's facility.
So, women's facility first, the FMC Carswell seems to be still the stable situation. I don't believe they have any active cases at this point. So they had 2, one passed away, and I think one recovered. So that's down to 0. We haven't heard any further updates on that. And the men's facility, I think the last I remember, it was like 654 total cases, about 500 or so recovered. It's about 150 some active, which they had a few that they had released. I forget that number on how many those were. But that's where we are with that. They're on the recovery path at this point. For the last several days, I think they added only maybe 2 new cases since we talked a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So it's been holding pretty steady.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hot off the press, if I may correct myself, is the inmate came in February. He was at Green Bay. He tested positive on April 28th, and then for the last 2 weeks he's been in the hospital since then. So he was there, and I was mistaken. We don't have 5 at JPS. We have now 2. So
He tested positive on April the 28th.
yes,
Do
sir.
you know when he first developed symptoms?
I don't know that.
Try to find that out, would you
Yeah.
please?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a couple of people here who have multiple. Well, one has just wants to talk about the COVID. The other one wants to do a briefing on public health briefing as well as the elections cycle. And she records that as 7A. So we're going to go ahead and call both of those folks. And then I've got some just on 287G that we'll talk to later. First person I'm going to call is Emma Jones.
Please leave your message for.
Next is Geraldine Cox.
Hello.
Hi, Geraldine. This is Judge Whitley. You had submitted a request to address the court regarding our public health briefing as well as the election cycle. So,
Yes, sir.
go ahead
Go
and,
ahead.
and make your comments.
Okay. Well, what I wanted was to request a bit of information. It's my understanding that the Fort Worth Police Department will now be doing a lot of the COVID testing in nursing homes, and that there are new federal regulations which require that the results of all COVID testing done in nursing homes, at least in skilled nursing facilities, shall be reported directly by the facility to the federal government. But how local data will be handled, or in other words, reporting to the state and reporting to the local health departments, is not addressed directly by the federal government. And so I was curious to know whether there will be direct input from the nursing homes to either the county or the state, or whether all data will simply be aggregated at the federal level. In other words, it's how much can we distinguish about what's going on where from that reporting system?
Now, Mr. Tenasia is here, and I'm going to ask him to address that question.
Good morning, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Good to hear from you again.
Then the other question we could deal with later as it comes up is just what will be, it's really that there's a grant going to the elections division from the Secretary of State, and there's not much explanation about how that money will be spent, so I'd be curious to know a little about that.
Mr. Garcia is going to, I believe, speak to that matter in a few moments.
Okay. Great.
Mr. Cox, good morning again. This is Vinny Tenasia, Director of Public Health. So you're partly right on the discussion about nursing home testing. So that is being done with a order from our governor that all nursing homes in Texas must be tested. And the effort here in Tarrant County is a partnership between public health and various fire departments. And so in Fort Worth, it's a partnership between public health and the Fort Worth Fire Department, where they're going out on our behalf to do the testing. We're providing all the logistical support, and they're providing the personnel to do the swabbing at nursing homes. Those results are, coming back to local public health and also being reported to the Department of State Health Services. The second half of your comment about the federal guidance, that is also true. There's been a lot of discussion at the federal level about knowing the status of outbreaks and cases in nursing homes. And they've mentioned a few times that they're going to make it a requirement through CMS for direct reporting to CMS, because that's where a lot of this regulation comes down for the nursing homes, that they will be receiving that information at the federal level. We're a little unclear on what their intent with that is. I guess they want to know, just like everybody else, on what's the issue or the quantity of the problem in nursing homes. And there's been some discussion about making that information publicly known, which I know you've mentioned that a couple of times in the last couple of weeks about not having that information available publicly. But again, in the state of Texas, the regulatory authority is Health and Human Services Commission. So that's where I would first direct you if you seek any of that information. But otherwise, this is sort of the clarification on where we are with that process. Testing is happening in nursing homes, in Texas all across. So did I miss any other part?
I think that was it. And then in a moment, we'll get to Mr. Garcia.
I think that the distinction between the testing being done by the fire department as opposed to the police department is an important one and should not be glossed over. These are not law enforcement officers going out doing testing and subject to discover a crime or lack of documentation on someone's part and therefore taking action. These are first responders whose job it is typically to be the first one to react with a person in medical distress. So these are not criminal investigative activities. This is a first responder activity, and there's a huge difference, and it should not be glossed over.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to try Emma Jones again at this time.
Please leave your message for 512-5555.
Emily, this is Judge Whitley. We tried to call twice today. We'll try you again, or I'm sure we'll get the chance to talk with you again next week. Mr. Manius.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the Court, I'd like to give you a quick status update on our 4 pillars as it relates to COVID-19 and to tell you where we are and what you should be expecting in the next couple of weeks. First of all, you might recall that our 4 pillars are our partnership support, testing, social services, rental assistance, and small business stimulus. And today you're going to, on the first one, under the partnership support, you're going to be able to begin to approve the ILAs with 4 municipalities a little bit later in the agenda. Obviously, we've been continuing our testing process, and as Mr. Tanasia has advised, we continue to do that. We'll also be talking about a setup by the National Guard for this coming weekend a little later on. Next week, you're going to be hearing a detailed discussion as it relates to rental assistance. We had some discussion of that last week. We're not going to have that discussion today, but that's something that we will cover next week. On the social services aspect of this, we are receiving some requests for support and from some social service agencies that serve both Fort Worth and Tarrant County. I know that Kristen is working with Guidehouse on those right now. We're going to be addressing those. I'd like to also tell you that I spoke with the city manager of Fort Worth, and we are in general agreement that whenever we have a social service entity that's made a request, if it services both Fort Worth and Tarrant County, that there will be some type of cost sharing between the city of Fort Worth and Tarrant County on this. So it wouldn't necessarily be 2 different contracts, but it'll be cost sharing so that we carry the cost burden in the county with the exception of the city, and the city covers it inside their city limits. So we're working on that. It was a very good discussion with the manager, and I think we're both in general agreement on how we would recommend to our governing bodies how we move forward. And then today you're going to be hearing a discussion, and I know that all of you have been at least contacted as it relates to the small business stimulus package. Ms. McMillan is going to make that presentation at that time. Before we ask Guidehouse to make any comments as it relates to that, I do want to go to item number 1 in the agenda. This concerns the executive orders, and I believe it was referenced earlier today. The governor last Friday did issue another executive order. This is JA-25, and it deals with jails, both municipalities and in counties. And the gist of this, the bulk of this, was that all county municipal jails are closed to in-person visitation, and every person in Texas shall avoid in-person visitation at closed jails, provided, however, that this restriction does not apply to visitation by 1, an attorney meeting with the client, or 2, a religious leader or member of the clergy. And the governor has authorized the Texas Commission on Jail Standards to provide further guidance to the local jails. And we passed that. I imagine the sheriff had already seen that, but last Friday when we saw it, we passed that information along not only to the court members but also to the sheriff's department. And with that, I believe that we have Guidehouse on the line. Katie, are you on the line at this time?
Yes, sir. We are here.
Okay. They do have a slide presentation, and Katie, I'll turn it over to you. Okay.
Great. Thank you, GK. Good morning, Judge and Commissioners. This is Katie Chesson with Guidehouse. So we're going to be starting with our typical timeline slide. Do you guys have it up?
Yes.
I can't. I have the delay. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one because we've actually provided a slide after this one that has a little bit more detail on what we're actually doing on the project. But we are entering into week 4 on this timeline slide. You'll notice we do still have a few activities that are in progress from previous weeks. And I do want to let you guys know that we have meetings scheduled for this week to address those activities, so we are able to complete all of them by the end of this week. So I'm going to go ahead and hop to the project status slide. So just to give you guys a little bit of insight as to what you're looking at. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to see the activities that we completed over the past week. And at the bottom, activities that are planned for this week. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see our current key activities, due dates, the status of those activities, whether they're on track, completed, if there's potential issues, or if they're at risk. And then finally at the bottom, you're going to see the areas for today's discussion. So that'll just kind of highlight the slides that we're going to be getting to later on during our conversation at court. So I'm just going to focus primarily on this slide on the current key activities. So as you'll see, we are currently on track with all of our current key activities. Last week, we began drafting a guidance letter to the ILA municipalities regarding the use of FEMA PA funds. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into 4 pillars, but just want to highlight that now. We do plan to have that to GK's team by Thursday of this week. We are also meeting with GK's team, as GK noted, to discuss external funding requests. We did a detailed review of all of the information you guys have received so far and conducted research to understand how other states, counties, and cities are handling similar programs. We will be continuing these discussions with GK's team this week and working with them to develop a strategy on how to get funding out to those NGOs and how Tarrant County could be partnering with them. Additionally, we are planning to provide an initial overview of available grant opportunities and the identified application requirements by end of week this week for all of you guys to review. And then we have been meeting with purchasing over the past 2 weeks, and our team is currently in the process of performing an initial procurement review. We anticipate completing this by June 5th, and we'll have all of that information for you guys upon completion. So to highlight the areas of discussion for this week, we're going to do our update on the pillars of focus, talk about the Tarrant County Opportunity Zones and the Economic Development Administration grants, and then finally close out with an update on the county spend. So do you guys have any questions on this slide?
I guess back on the previous slide that you were on, this is Judge Whitley. When you talk about provide initial overview of available grant opportunities, is this the small business grants that we're talking about?
It will actually be for all grants that are available federally from private funding sources that would be available to Tarrant County that you guys could be applying for to get additional funds to respond to COVID-19.
So this is grants coming to us and not grants being given from us?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you going to do any review of grants we are making? Or now I guess the one right above that, develop a strategy for partnering with local non-government organizations. Is that what NGO stands for?
Yes, sir.
And so is that going to be like the Meals on Wheels, things along that type lines?
Yes, so we are looking at all of the requests that you guys have received and then working with GK's team to come up with either a way to stand up a program to get funding to them or potentially stand up a program to identify ways that you guys could partner with them to get funding to them and then on to the constituents.
Okay, have y'all in the past, with regards to that third bullet and back to our grant application that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, have y'all reviewed that with any of your other clients to determine that you feel like it meets the criteria established by the government or by the U.S. Treasury?
Brooke, do you have any thoughts on that, Brooke?
So Judge, was your question relating to the programs that the county is currently working on and whether or not they are in compliance with federal regulations?
Just reviewing them to make sure that you believe they are in compliance with federal regulations.
Yes, that is a part of the scope of our work, and that is something we do regularly with our clients. We work hand in hand we'll work hand in hand with the county administrator's office and the various departments involved to ensure that those programs are in compliance with the regulations as we understand them today. Often these regulations are a moving target, and what we know today may change next week, but we will be working with guidance as published today.
And Judge, that's one reason why, if you look at the first element of the draft, the guidance letter to the ILA municipalities, we want to make sure that our municipalities have the same understanding we have as how we can expend those funds. Okay. Other questions, or should they move forward? Katie, let's move forward, okay?
Okay. So we will move forward to the Tarrant County Pillars of Focus slide. So starting this out, we'll start with the COVID-19 testing. So last week we discussed that $11 billion that was going to be allocated out to state and municipalities from the federal government. As of last week, a portion of those funds were actually allocated out, and Texas Health and Human Services actually received $474 million from that $11 billion. Our team is currently reaching out to the state to understand if and how that money is going to be distributed out to the counties or the cities. And we will be sure to keep you guys up to date whenever we receive additional guidance from the state. So just wanted to give you guys an update that money has been allocated out, and we are working right now to try to figure out if that's going to be flowing out.
What was the determining factor for New York, Chicago, and Houston to get direct allocations?
So there were a couple different ways it was allocated. It was allocated either based on the number of positive test results, or it was allocated based on the on like a standard grant formula. So I think it's both of those things combined is how it ended up being pushed out to Houston, Chicago, and New York City, but only a very small handful of cities or counties actually received this allocation directly. It's primarily just to the states.
So that's not a complete list, that's a partial list.
Yes, that's just a partial list to show what localities actually received the direct allocation.
Katie, this is Commissioner Allen. Was Houston the only city in Texas to receive a direct allocation?
Yes, ma'am. Houston was the only city that received it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on the COVID-19 testing pillar? Okay, so we'll move on to the economic stimulus pillar. So as GK mentioned, his group has been developing the Small Business Assistance Grant Program, and our team is providing guidance as needed on that program. We have also this week started discussions with GK's team on Economic Development Administration CARES Act adjustment grants. So there are additional funds out there, and we're going to be jumping in this on the next couple slides, so I'm just going to hit the highlights right now. But we've been talking to his team. We're in the planning discussions trying to identify where and how Tarrant County could utilize these grant opportunities. We'll jump into that on the next slide here in a little bit. And then on the social services pillar, so again, GK's team is working on developing the Tenant and Landlord Assistance Grant Program, and we are providing guidance as needed to their team on that program. And as noted on the previous slide, we have been working on developing a strategy around external agency requests and how to get funding to these NGOs, and how Tarrant County could potentially partner with these NGOs to get programs stood up for constituents. And then finally, on the local partners pillar. So there's currently no cap on the funding available through FEMA PA. And there are actually quite a few CRF costs that are eligible under FEMA PA. So we're really encouraging Tarrant County and the municipalities to exhaust FEMA before utilizing their CRF funds. As such, we are drafting a letter, a guidance letter to the ILA municipalities to encourage them to seek FEMA reimbursements prior to utilizing the CRF funds that were being pushed out to them. So that's high level update on the 4 pillars. Do you guys have any questions on that?
Can the money that we're sending out to the cities be used as the match for the FEMA grants?
That's a good question.
Could you repeat that? Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The money that we're sending out to the cities through these ILAs, can that be used to for the 25% FEMA match?
Yeah.
Dr. Rob.
Yes, Judge, that is the money that you are providing to the cities is out of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. That is the fund that the White House published guidance actually last Tuesday out to the governors, stating that they intended to publish additional guidance to provide that the CRF funds would be used for local match of FEMA PA. So that's the local cost share, the 25% cost share. So what we are looking to do is encourage the cities to utilize FEMA PA for those eligible costs first before they apply the CRF funds. That's the idea, so that we would maximize the ability to use those CRF funds for other purposes and other programs.
Katie indicated that in working with our community partners, the cities, that y'all were going to be suggesting that they use their FEMA dollars before their CARES Act funding. The slide, however, says that you are developing a letter to require that they use their FEMA funding before their CARES Act funding. There's a big difference between the two, and which is it going to be?
Commissioner, we'll clarify the guidance that we have discussed with the county administrator's office was that we would provide a letter that would suggest in that encourage might be the appropriate word there. In that if the cities
is a misstatement.
Our goal is to encourage them to do that, because that's simply another form of a revenue stream. And now, since Tuesday, since we can use the CARE Act as a 25% match, that will free up additional CARE Act money for those cities.
Seeking a clarification and an admission that requires was a misstatement.
That's correct.
Thank you.
That's correct.
Any other questions on this slide?
I want to go back a little bit to social services.
Okay.
I know that we had put together a list of our local nonprofits and had asked them to tell us what their what the COVID cost had been to their organization, and I think most of them had given us some information. Who was that information sent to? Has it been?
So,
where's Kristen? Has it been sent off? And
so it comes in off a website. It's TC Admin. That's where they've been sending that. We monitor that. We pull those off. Kristen is running point on that for our office, and Kristen is talking with Guidehouse on those to make sure that the requests are qualified for COVID funding.
can I see a list of the ones that you sent off for?
Sure, absolutely.
Can you get that for me?
Yeah. We'll make it available to all the court.
Yeah, I think the last time that I saw something was maybe a few weeks ago, and so assuming that a lot of work has been done on it, but there are a few organizations that said that they were going to submit something, but I'm not sure if they did or not, and if they didn't, I want to make sure that we follow up with
We'll
them.
be more than happy to make that list available. Absolutely.
Are these services, are they talking about the dollars they've spent, and that they need help in the reimbursement?
Yeah.
Or are they and then also for anticipated services that they're going to provide?
This started with a comment you made on one of your 8 o'clock calls to nonprofits, and they started Catholic Charities and a lot of those that were regularly on your calls. I know we're sending then, and we were asked to contact our nonprofits, and I guess in each area. And I just want to be sure. I'd like to see the list of who is on the list.
And make sure we're doing something with them.
Yeah, exactly.
When I understood it to be both, perhaps what they have been doing and then what they anticipate doing. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Because we had talked about kind of thinking out of the box. I remember what you're saying now. It's where I asked them to kind of think out of the box and figure out what they felt like they might be doing between whatever that date was going forward through December 30th. And so this is more of the outreach services that we're talking about, but there may also be some additional costs in the form of personnel or stuff within the organization in order to be able to provide those additional services to the folks, all COVID-19 related.
And so what we're trying to do is to reach out to each and every one of those to get a more detailed description as to if it is a prior expenditure or if it's a futuristic program, and in order to capture the potential costs. And then we work with Guidehouse to make sure that those costs are covered by the CARE Act.
And I guess
a good example, Judge, you might remember Meals on Wheels when they expanded their activities, and their numbers were increasing, but they said they could do more if they had additional monies to do that. So there's a program where they're incurring costs, but futuristically they could deliver a larger number of services to those people that were shut in because of COVID. And so those are the type of programs we're looking at.
And one of the things that I want to be sure we consider and keep in mind, when we set up those calls in the first place, we asked for there to be representatives of different sectors, and that those representatives were to go from that call and go back to their sectors and to spread whatever news we got and to bring to us whatever concerns were by other organizations that were providing similar services in that particular area. I want to be sure that part of the reason, well, I agree with you 100%, and I think that the reason I would like to see that list is the same thing you're thinking about, is we constantly talked about Meals on Wheels, but there's also a Metroport Meals on Wheels, and there are other organizations that may be providing food pantries and things along that lines, and we need to see specifically who we've heard from so that those people who we haven't.
I know I've got 4 or 5 organizations that are food pantries, and we contacted them to get that information. We got that information, and I haven't heard anything. And you're saying that you're going to get me something, and so I'm waiting.
Yes, you asked for the list. We're going to get you the list. That's what your request is.
And I'm from Guidehouse's standpoint, I think we're very close to begin writing checks and giving money out to other organizations besides the cities. I mean, obviously today we're going to approve about $21 million or more of money going out to the cities. I hope that in the very soon time frame we're also giving money out to the service organizations, rent assistance, and things along that timeline. So I agree with you, Commissioner.
Well, I'd like to see the list. And I've said that about 5 times, and I don't have it in my hand yet. So, but I would like to see it so I'll know whether
We'll try to
ones
get
in
it
my
to you.
area have,
Yeah.
or even on it.
We'll try to get it to you by this afternoon.
Thank you.
And get it to each member of the court.
Absolutely. Okay. Katie, you want to move forward?
Yeah, if we could go ahead and hop to the next slide on economic development administration grants. Rachel, if you want to take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Katie. Good morning, everyone. So we wanted to speak briefly about the EDA grant that's available through the CARES Act. And this is the Economic Development Administration, a federal agency. We've already spoken with the county's economic development and community development teams about this, and they are considering projects and looking for some potential off-the-shelf projects that might be a good fit. We wanted to give you some overview about this grant and what this opportunity is. The purpose of this grant is to further economic development in response to the economic impact of COVID-19. There's $236 million available for the region, and that includes the states there. In the past, the average grant size for this program is $1.4 million, but it's expected to be higher than that for this particular response, just given the magnitude of response necessary. And there is a local match required of about 20%. This is a competitive application process, so there's no guaranteed funding allocations, and applications are awarded on a rolling basis, so it is encouraged to apply quickly. Applicants will be judged on how well their proposed project responds to the local economic impacts of COVID-19, how well it aligns with the regional SEDS, and how well it aligns with EDA's investment priorities, which we list here. Another component is how many high-quality jobs are expected to be created through the proposed project. So given those objectives, possible projects include technical assistance for businesses around recruitment and retention, workforce development programming for job seekers, infrastructure projects that create new jobs, and strategies to attract new employers to the area. And in our next slide, we'll provide more detail on the program, but before we move on, I just want to pause in case there are any questions now.
I had a question. On the $236 million that's available to 5 states, of course, that's not a whole lot of money, but can we use our CARE dollars as our match? It says 20% match, 0 to 20%.
That's a good question. Rob, are you on the line?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I didn't either.
I said, sorry, Rob, are you on the line? Would you happen to know?
Judge, we actually haven't seen any guidance about that, but we'll be happy to do some further research and get back to you on that.
Does that matter? I mean, if we could use our CARE dollars, it would.
I mean, that would certainly, I think that's, anytime we just need to know what our options are.
Yeah.
And would critical infrastructure be highways, or is it primarily something other than that?
It could be highways. I think this is something that kind of, again, back to like public works projects. So any kind of large construction project where there are jobs being created that are considered to be high quality jobs based on salary, career progression, and things like that. If there are no other questions, we can move to the next slide. We'll keep talking about the EDA grant. There's just a bit more information we have on it. So as you'll see here, we've heard interest expressed around available funding for opportunity zones, and opportunity zones are an investment priority for the EDA CARES Act grant. Projects that are located in an opportunity zone may be seen favorably by EDA. So we give one example here about, a proposed project may take a look at some previous obstacles to private investment in the county's opportunity zones and work to mitigate those challenges. We've also noted a couple other possible considerations for what a competitive application might look like. The first is collaborating with partners. As you just raised, $236 million for the region is not a lot. So if there are ways to partner with other counties or sort of, present an application that shows a broader impact, you'd be able to maybe be seen as more competitive in a request for a higher dollar amount. Also, we want to just reiterate the importance of creating high quality jobs through this application, something that could be done through taking a look at the workforce demographics, industry demand, and skill development resources to identify potential opportunities. And these are just some examples to help paint a picture of what these projects could look like. there any questions on this slide or the previous slide on EDA?
This is Commissioner Allen. Thanks for having this information this week. I'm especially interested in the opportunity zone that's in Arlington and that entire East Pioneer Corridor. Last year, we did joint funding with Dallas County to work on a study, or the City of Grand Prairie worked on a study. And I had a number of meetings scheduled to kind of get an update on that and to move things forward in early March, right before all things COVID hit. So I'd really be curious to see what opportunities we have to work with the City of Arlington, City of Grand Prairie, and Dallas County for that entire corridor. There are a number of small businesses, but then also larger developments that I know that those larger developments are suffering because their retail commercial clients, obviously their businesses are suffering. So I think that there is certainly some work to be done there.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that responds, like we said, directly to, the proven impacts that you're experiencing. So you talk about a few different suffering businesses and things like that. If you're able to provide information on that and show how the project responds directly to that, that's a strong application.
Okay. So then what would be the next step, particularly on that part? Would it be a separate call for us to discuss that, or what?
To discuss the application?
Or this, right, kind of what's already been done with this corridor, and then what possibly could be done by way of the application?
So I believe Lisa and her team are looking into possible application ideas, and they're looking at some projects that might be a good fit. But maybe we could move forward with that, and it sounds like you want to be involved in that process.
I would like to. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
Any other questions on this slide? And then I believe up next, Brooke will provide an update on expenditures. Okay, great. Yeah, it sounds like we can move on to the next one.
Okay, thank you, Judge, Commissioners. This week, we do not have changes to the funding slide. We have a meeting this Thursday with Budget and Audit where we're going to dive into some additional costs to break these costs out, but we won't necessarily see changes week to week. The expenses to date that have been allocated to FEMA are about $4.9 million. The expenses that have been earmarked for the relief fund, which includes the $62 million ILA distribution, the $30 million economic stimulus, the $20 million testing, and the $20 million in social services and county ops. That $172 million earmarked for the CRF relief fund, and then expended to date $13,000 under the CRF, leaving about 37 million remaining in the CRF fund. And then with multiple grants, again, about 14 million earmarked in the multiple grants. I can run through that list if you would like, but it's a growing list. And then just the overall overview right now, we've got about 186 million earmarked out of the total bucket of funding for the county. And about 4.9 million expended to date, leaving about 59 or so remaining when we think about what is available with FEMA public assistance and multiple grants that are still available out there that the county might be able to apply for. Do I have any questions?
I guess the FEMA, is that one of the ones that we can use for foreclosure rental assistance and food assistance?
Rob, do you want to speak to FEMA PA for foreclosure assistance and rental assistance? That is typically more on the HUD side, but I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, no, that Brooke had the same response there. So FEMA funds really are meant to be reimbursed for for government or private nonprofit entities for expenses they're incurring related to COVID-19. So I would say not likely an eligible expense. That would typically be something that would fall under one of the HUD programs or coronavirus relief fund. or any of the other potential funding sources that would come down. But I'm happy to discuss those details to understand that a little bit further, if that would be helpful.
Well, I had also, I guess, understood if there were monies coming in from HUD. Does HUD have any grants out there that we could be applying for, or is that under the multiple grants right now?
So there's none right now that you should.
Oh, go ahead, Brett. Sorry.
Well, I was just to answer the judge's specific question. That is under the multiple grants. For example, the grant programs that Patricia is currently working on, CDBG, CV funds, that's about $2.5 million, I believe. The HUD ESG, $1.3 million. The HUD HOPWA, about $131K. So those are reflected under the multiple grants.
Okay, thank you.
And so what happens sometimes whenever we use HUD funds versus CARE Act funds, if it comes through the flow through our CDBG program, which we've received about $2.5–3 million on top of our normal allocation, the requirements for the expenditure of those funds may be more restrictive than just a CARES Act fund. We follow HUD guidelines and CDBG guidelines on those. But what we are doing, we are expending that money now, and it's mainly in rental assistance, continuing our rental assistance programs. The rental assistance program we've talked about, where Commissioner Brooks, Commissioner Allen, you're spearheading, that deals mainly with the CARE Act. So we talked about the 211 approach to a lot of the rental assistance. A lot of the HUD money goes through that particular program. So, are there any further questions for Guidehouse?
I have a general one. I'm curious because I know we have a number of public and private institutions of colleges and universities, and I'm assuming that they're going through their own process to see what resources are available to them. I know, like with the public universities, obviously they're very limited on what that they can spend state dollars on. I don't know if those are considerations that we should be making, or conversations maybe that are already being had. I mean, I speak regularly with Dr. Coppola and with Dr. Lim, but I don't know if there's something more that we can be doing to support the universities and colleges of the community.
You know, what I would suggest is that if they have programs that they may want to seek funding, let them talk with us. But at the same time, we also realize that the state has a substantial amount of CARE Act dollars. Yeah. And, you know, we had talked offline a little bit about the ISDs and what they're doing, and I know TEA is helping to fund some of those programs. So, but if there's any of those issues, Kristen, we haven't received anything from any of the colleges, either public or private. If they want to talk with us, have them contact Kristen.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
We did get a letter from the, I guess, state leaders late Friday afternoon that basically said, we're not planning on sending you any more money.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is this in response to the letter we sent, or is it something separate?
It's in response to the letter that the 11 judges sent. Okay. They have not specifically addressed the letter we sent, but they did respond back and say, "No, we don't." So, but we kind of left the door open, and hopefully, I talked with a couple of representatives this weekend, and at least just said, you know, we're trying to get them to match dollars that we're spending, not, you know, necessarily giving us dollars from the county's perspective, from that standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
And we've still not gotten any indication as to how they plan on spending that $6.2 billion, let alone the 1.8 or 1.2, I guess, they still have of local funds.
I do think, though, as it relates to that, Your Honor, you know, we talk about costs that from mandates that are coming down from the state, especially in some of the testing areas of the nursing homes, and I understand that there's a mandate now that we may be testing all of our inmates And first of all, the nursing homes actually taking the swabs, the fire department stepped up and they volunteered to do that. The cost of actually running the test and everything. Remember, one of the things that Guidehouse provided us in this briefing at the very beginning that the COVID-19 testing now that money has been distributed, and the state of Texas has picked up another $474 million for testing. If there's a cost to run those tests through the private labs, then that should not be borne by the locals. That should be borne by the state, because it's a mandate that came from the governor that did that.
And I'm assuming, as the sheriff talked about earlier, that if they're mandating that we test everyone in the jails, Jail Standards is doing that, then Jail Standards would pay for that.
That's how we're viewing this, because if not, well, then we're going to be going through our COVID money pretty quickly, while money for exactly that activity is sitting in the state, especially now that they've received almost another $500 million to do testing. So, is there any other questions for Guidehouse? Okay, Katie and your team, thank you. Okay, if we can move, are we ready to move forward on the agenda, Your Honor?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move to item number 3. We're requesting that the court approve the site for the mobile testing in coordination with the Texas Division of Emergency Management. This is the National Guard. We are recommending that this Friday and Saturday that site be the Mansfield Sub Courthouse, which is located at 1100 East Broad Street in Mansfield. And then the next site that would come up would be a site in Precinct 1.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Well,
I knew it was coming.
Yeah. I would like to add, I do think this is a good location given its proximity to 287 and all of the zip codes that kind of fall north of there and serving Mansfield, Kennedale, Grand Prairie, and Arlington. So thanks to everyone for their work on this so far.
So we can now move to item number 4. This is the Small Business Assistance Grant Program. Ms. McMillan is going to make that presentation.
Good morning, Judge, Commissioners.
Morning.
So we come back to you today with a modified look at our Small Business Assistance Grant Program. And first, I want to thank each of you, Commissioner Brooks, Commissioner Allen, Judge Whitley, Commissioner Fickus, and Commissioner Johnson, for talking with us last week and sharing your input and your thoughts on this program, and most specifically to Commissioner Fickus and his staff for the invaluable guidance that they have given in his role as the liaison for the economic stimulus and in moving this package forward to you today.
Here, here.
In your packets, we have a revised presentation. After what was sent out is a true representation of what the program is and the guidelines, what was included in the agenda. But over the weekend, we tried to drill down a little bit more and provide specific detail so it would create a better picture of the program and give more clarity, including a draft application that we have provided also in your packet. At last week's meeting, we heard the discussion regarding the process, the application review, how the grants would be funded, and the need for a lot of promotion and marketing. So we are putting that in this program. And this presentation will provide an overview of that process and implementation and provide details on the proposed grant guidelines and the eligibility to get the grant, and to provide a look at the application and the decision blocks in the application that cue the forward movement into the auditor's review. So in the interest of time, if possible, I'd like to go through the presentation first, and then we could have questions and discussions at the end of the presentation.
see that grin.
So just to kind of go over what we talked about last week, we did do a survey of the cities and chambers in the county. We got responses from 21 cities and 9 chambers. And as I mentioned last week, the majority of the need, as from the survey we received back, was in the restaurant and retail sector, those very small businesses with 10 or few employees, and the preferred assistance areas were $5,000 to $10,000 grants. And most of the cities and chambers said that they cannot do anything at this time to help out those businesses in their areas due to the limited funds. In fact, a lot of the chambers we've spoke to have actually had to furlough employees, as well as some of the city staffs are having to be furloughed due to the loss of revenues. So this grant program is going to be needed for all. Judge Whitley made a note about the concerns on the grant program and how we move forward and how it is in response to the CARES Fund guidelines. And I put this slide in here this time to show that the guidance that was sent down by the U.S. Treasury in April and further defined on May 4th does show that expenses associated with provision of economic support in connection with the public health emergency of COVID-19 includes such expenditures related to the provision of grants to small businesses that would reimburse for the costs of business interruption because of the closures. So our grant program process, this is a broad overview, and then we'll drill down into specifics in later slides. But under the program parameters that we're going to be discussing today, we're going to get that approval from Commissioner's Court. And then after this, we will be sending it to the auditor's office and the DA's office to make sure what we have in here is okay. The certification blocks meet with their specifications, and any refinement then on those documentation requirements or any kind of certification requirements will be presented next week with the approval of the 381 program agreement, and this program will be a part of that agreement. So next week we will come back to you for the approval of the 381 grant of public funds that will enable us then to get these grants out. Already we have been working with the IT department, and they are working on the webpage information and an application. We are also looking into some other avenues for an online application that might be outside of the county's own IT department, and we'll be exploring those in this week. As many of you have mentioned, program assistance and in the promotion of this grant program is very important to get the word out. And this timeline will provide for 10 business days, up to 14 days, calendar days of promotion before we actually start taking applications. They'll be able to go onto the website and see all of the eligibility requirements and what they will have to gather in documentation before the application period opens. The applications will be open for a set period of time, and then once they're open for that period, then all grants that are submitted and eligible will have the opportunity for some level of funding based on our funding pool. The application formulas that are in the application will determine the base eligibility and the maximum grant amount from the applicant provided information. So this is an objective program that it goes through. The information hits certain decision points in the application, and then what comes out will be an eligible amount of grant dollars. The applications will then be processed and reviewed by the auditor's office, and that review will be to determine the business qualifications. They'll be checking on the EIN, whether that business was in business, as they say, since January 1. They'll be reviewing for the inclusion of documentation. We're going to give enough time for everybody to get their documents submitted. We don't want to be like Williamson County where we're calling 50% and asking people, you can submit this documentation. So one of the standards is all the documents must be submitted. The auditor's office may contact the applicant for clarification, but if the requested documents are not submitted with the application would be set aside and denied because of not being eligible. So it's going to be important to get that information out, but that way the process can move forward and we're not asking for documentation when it was requested. And then the auditor's office will also be checking just to make sure that the documentation provided does support the numbers that the applicant has provided in terms of their payroll costs and their fixed cost. The grant distribution amounts will be determined by the Commissioner's Court based on the total grant dollars of the eligible applications, and then the grants will be funded through the auditor's AP process, and then we will finalize with the grant payment report to the Commissioner's Court. As we mentioned, that period for promotion and assistance is going to be key, and we are looking at providing a 2-week period. We will work with the chambers, the cities, social media. Commissioner Allen suggested restaurant licensing so that we can get down to every business that we can. I know that some of the smaller cities have already reached out to me that they are willing to get with their businesses. They want to spread this word. It's going to be a little harder in Arlington because Arlington is a larger population, so that's going to really tax us to find ways to get that information out. Again, the program guidelines will be on our website for viewing during that time period. We're looking at ways to maybe get some application assistance centers opened up. As I mentioned last week, the Small Business Development Center through the Tarrant County College has indicated that they would help with assistance. We're going to talk to the chambers and the cities and even maybe at some of the precinct offices if we could have times when people can come in. They may need help in scanning their documents so that for upload or just understanding what the actual documentation is that they need to include. And again, we're going to put a link on the page for the Small Business Development Center training video that will assist the businesses in knowing how to utilize the funds to keep their business going. And the set application period will be on the website so they know that there is a time period, and then once that time is gone, the application has to be set in. And then finally, all grants, there will be a notice emailed to applicants either of award or denial. So, to get into the meat of the grant application and the guidelines that have been presented to you, the program itself, as we have, you've already approved, is a $30 million total grant funding. It will be for small businesses, 25 or less full-time equivalent employees, and 20% or $6 million of the grant funds are set aside for minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses. The grant amounts can be up to a maximum of $10,000 each, but these will be based on the individual business reported payroll or fixed cost, the total eligible amount of the applications received, and the amount of funds available. So all eligible and qualified applications will receive some amount of funding. Now, the individual grant amounts may be less than requested or eligible depending on the amount of grant funding requested. So if we look at kind of an example, if the overall grant amounts that are brought in are $40 million and we have a $30 million pool of money, $6 million of that pool is the 20% that are set aside for minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses. There is going to be a check, yes or no, on minority, women-owned businesses, and as that application will be set over and qualified under the $6 million pool of money. Once that $6 million money is given out, those applications will not be, the initial applications will not be reduced by a percentage. They would be funded directly on the eligible grant amount. After those are funded, the $6 million is full, any remaining applications that are minority, women, or veteran-owned will be put back into the general pool. So if we had the $6 million, that allows $24 million left in the general pool. And if we had a $40 million in applications, that would mean that we would have $34 million left in funding and only 24 million of funding applications and only 24 million of grant funds. So what would happen is, in order to bring those other applications down to reach the eligible funding amount, we would take 70% across the board of all of the eligible amounts. So everybody's grant would be reduced by the same amount, and then everybody's grant would be funded at some level. Commissioner.
I think, let the record show that it was not I.
Yeah. I had a bet.
Maybe I don't want to say anything. Under the minority, women, and veterans, we have the opportunity to serve more of them, same amount of dollars, but more if we reduce their portion also. It's just a thought.
I agree.
You're going to serve more of them with more money than if you drop them out and put them back into the other bucket.
Commissioner Allen and I had a discussion on this. The concern about putting all of the MWVs in one pool and then reducing that by a percentage could mean that we were heavy on those applications. Maybe that was reduced by 50% instead of 70%. Because the need is greater with the minority, women, and veteran-owned, typically they're underutilized and disadvantaged businesses, we felt that it would be best to move all of those in, and those would be obviously we have to take those in an order that they came in until that $6 million and fund them at the eligible amount. What was remaining would then be moved over into the general pool, and the same way we had presented last week, it's the same thing was happening, because it was first come, first serve. The $6 million was gone, and then the others would be moved in and eligible for the other grant. This way, it's just moved over, and whoever comes after the $6 million is depleted, they still are eligible for funding. It's just they're lumped into the larger pool and could be reduced based on the larger pool.
I think we could look at it, though, from a couple of different ways and see which would be most beneficial, because on a first-come, first-served basis, that means you could have folks who really need the funds coming in later on because they weren't quick enough in getting it in. They got thrown over into the pool, it gets reduced, whereas the other group does not. So I think we can look at it and see how we could go about doing the calculation that would benefit the minority and women-owned and veteran businesses, and do what we feel like would treat them the fairest. And I don't know that we can do that until we see how many applications we get in. You could have one person or one business moved over, or you could have 100. So until we look at that, I wouldn't make the statement that we're not going to reduce that overall pool, because it could be a smaller reduction than what they'll get when they move over into the next pool.
I think we can help more people, and that's the whole goal here, in my opinion, is to help as many as we can. And we have that opportunity the way we were headed, and by putting this in, you're going to hurt, I think, the minority, a portion of the minority, women, and veteran community.
I can see it both ways. I think the judge's suggestion is a good one, that we wait and see how many applications we have before we decide upon the methodology.
I agree.
So we can move forward with not having a calculation, but do we still want to move forward with 20%?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. How that is figured out, we can determine at a different date.
Correct.
All right. So for base eligibility, the business obviously has to be located in Tarrant County, but it has to be outside of the city of Fort Worth. It was brought up that there are some businesses that are located in one of the other cities, but have a Fort Worth address. One of the questions will be on the application is, what city is your business located in? We asked for the address, but we're going to actually specifically say what city is it located in, and either the city name or unincorporated.
I think it's more of a zip code than it is maybe an address. North Richland Hills has a zip code that shows Fort Worth. Haltom City
so does Haltom City.
has a zip code that shows Fort Worth.
So does Forest Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that
A lot
was
of these cities do not have a post office. So the address
Is
contains the city of the nearest post office.
I think you're going about the right way.
the business must be a sole proprietor, subcontractor, or other small business, again, with 25 or less full-time equivalent employees.
Let me just throw something out. Subcontractor is not a, quote, type of, I don't consider that a type of business, like a sole proprietor, but, I mean, a contractor, not a subcontractor, a contractor who calls himself a contractor easily qualifies for this.
We'll change that wording to say contractor.
You know, a corporation, which you don't mention.
Partnership and corporations need to be on there.
Almost, you know, the vast majority of, well, maybe they're not, but a large percentage of companies are corporations and not DBAs or sole proprietorship.
And we said other small business, but we can clarify that more.
Yeah, I thought that was listed in the eligible business.
Officially registered business as of January 1, 2020, and then the business revenues must be shown to be negatively impacted by the COVID-19 public health emergency as per the CARES Act. And so we are looking at in the application form as a question of whether the business was closed or partially closed. And that they had a revenue loss since March of 2020. We're going to be asking that the company provide their gross revenues for January and February of 2020, and then they also provide their gross revenues for April and May of 2020, and that will determine a loss in revenue and an impact. And then the business cannot have any delinquent property taxes, tax liens, or judgments.
Is there a situation, and this may be a tax assessor collector question, is there a situation where COVID could have caused a tax delinquency? When did tax payments become delinquent?
January 31st.
Okay.
Well, wait a minute.
Well, I think the next there are payment systems. And the next
Systems you can make half payments, half in November 30th, the other half by June 30th. So there are half payments.
For us old fogies,
You can use for cash flow.
for old fogies like over 65,
Yes.
they could have been delinquent on March the 28th or on May the
I thought it was July 1st.
That would be a homestead, sir, because you can only claim that on a homestead for over 65. You cannot claim it on a business.
Well, I know it, but we're saying that if property taxes are delinquent, period. So if you got an owner and he's delinquent, yeah, that's why I read it. If you're delinquent on property taxes, period, you ain't getting anything.
But if you're filing this application as a corporation, the check's going to be written to a corporation. It doesn't matter what that guy's done.
So what if he's a sole proprietor?
No, that's not a corporation.
So
If a sole proprietor is delinquent on personal property taxes, that puts them in a different category than from a corporation that does not have personal property to be considered. And that is perhaps a disadvantage.
There could be a sole member LLC also.
Come.
I just didn't want to scare her walking up on her. There could be a sole member LLC, and that sole member LLC would be reported on their personal tax return.
I think there should be some consideration for persons who may be delinquent on property taxes because of the COVID situation. You don't want them paying. Well, I would prefer that they not have to make the choice between paying property taxes to be eligible and buying food or something else.
Yes, sir.
Somewhere in the back of my mind, I recall there being a specific exemption for us considering taxes or being able to consider taxes as a loss.
The CARES, the coronavirus relief funds cannot be used to pay for property taxes or sales taxes. So I understand what you're saying, Commissioner Brooks. These would pay for the expenses. And
we're using the payment of property taxes as an excluder for relief under the Act, and that's different from using CRF funds to pay property taxes.
we put this in, and other counties have done this also. I think Dallas County has this as a qualifier. You know, if it comes up, and
better off if you had them referred to that county to the east.
What about Fort Worth? What is Fort Worth too?
I believe that they also have that in theirs also. You know, the thought is that if we were to give funds out and then we find out that we have given funds to somebody that's very delinquent in their property taxes, I think that's something that if we find that could be something that we could research further if those are kicked out. Because if it's something that somebody's been delinquent for the last year or so, then obviously that wouldn't be because of this. We can very easily cull the ones that are just recent delinquencies and find out more about that.
You might want to not just refer to property taxes because, and this could be very probable. Someone who is delinquent in their payroll taxes, because they could have been, that payroll report was due March 31st. By the time they got around to April 30th when that payroll tax had to be paid by, now they may have been in the height of that and they may have decided not to pay the payroll taxes. So you might ought to just remove it. And I think this is something we're going to have to consider further as we get down the line a little bit. So I'm not saying we've got to make the decision today. And I think your application just asks the question as to whether or not they're delinquent.
Actually, the application does not. It was just part of the guidelines so that in qualifications as we go through them, if we find that someone is delinquent in their property taxes in the check of that application, when we go through and look at them and make sure where they are through the tax office files and we find out they're delinquent, then they wouldn't meet the guidelines, but it's not asked.
How about we create some wiggle room by saying something to the effect that persons who are delinquent on property taxes may be considered to be ineligible.
All right, done.
That allows us to take a case-by-case look.
But so if I heard you correctly, Lisa, you're saying that that's more on the underwriting side, not on the application itself, right? Did I ask about that?
Correct. Okay.
You got somebody standing behind you with their hand up.
Yeah, I got a question for her also.
I'd like to bring to the attention of the court that there is also business personal property that is a property tax for businesses. That is also something that you need to consider because that is separate from property tax on real estate. There's also business property tax, BPP, that is also involved in the taxes as well.
I think Commissioner Brooks mentioned that.
I would not feel good about excluding somebody because they were delinquent on business personal property tax.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that if it was something that you guys wanted to address in this, that you were thorough, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Real estate taxes.
Wendy,
Yes, sir.
on personal property tax.
Yes, sir. On real estate?
And I guess probably commercial, commercial property or personal.
Yes.
Or you said you're delinquent February 1st.
If the half payment hasn't been made in November by the 30th of the prior
So
year.
what
yes.
are you, let's say you don't make it, and you go all the way to July 1st. What do you call then? Double delinquent or?
It is delinquent and it is turned over to our collection attorneys.
Yeah, but are you delinquent on February 1st?
You are delinquent on February 1st,
Okay.
yes.
You're-
The penalties and interest accrue
Right.
and they increase each month after that, as of the very first day that you're delinquent on February 1st. And then we get to a certain point that we do turn those collections over to our delinquent attorneys, and they further. I've received payments this year for taxes back to 2010, so we're still, taxes are always due.
I'm just questioning whether it's February 1st you're delinquent or July 1st you're delinquent.
It depends.
You've made a choice.
Yes.
To maybe pay those interest payments and penalties up to and through June, and then make your payment on June 30th. Okay?
According to tax code,
But you're still considered delinquent.
Yes, sir. According to tax code, you are delinquent on February 1st
Okay.
if you did not choose to institute the
Do the
half
half,
payment on by November 30th. If it was made on December 1st, then you've made a partial payment and the remainder of it is due by January 31st.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So we can change the wording to May in that. But, and also I thought about this, and what if we look at, because what we're really trying to make sure that we don't give funds out to someone that is severely delinquent, and then when the list is released, it's not a good perception. And so I think if we looked at delinquencies prior to January 1, so that would be if they were delinquent on 2018 tax year, because 2019 tax year is what was due January 31st. So for prior tax years, then that all happened before. If we look at that delinquency, I think that might solve that, and that's really what we're wanting to see. Okay, we'll make that change. Again, we are limiting the applications to one business per owner or ownership group. The application must be submitted online, and again, like I mentioned, must include all required documentation submitted with the application. So the eligible grant amount. The eligible grant amount will be equal to the 1 times the average monthly payroll cost, and that average monthly payroll cost is figured based on the payroll cost for the first quarter, January through March of 2020, or the average monthly fixed cost, again figured on these costs for the first quarter of 2020, and that would be multiplied by 2. And I have an example further down in the slide presentation that we can drill into that. This shows a little bit of the required documentation that we will be asking for. The Form W-9 will provide all of their Social Security and employee identification number, and will be necessary for the auditor's office to issue funds as a type of vendor in their system. We'll ask for one of the second items that shows that they are a registered business. We'll be asking for bank statements for the period January 1 through May 31. And for the payroll, we'll ask for the first quarter payroll report or their first quarter 941. For a sole proprietor, the Schedule C from the previous year. And then fixed costs, we'll ask for, on the application, an itemized list of the fixed costs, and they can provide proof of the payment of these expenses. They could have a profit and loss statement or other financial statement, or if they don't have those, they can just show those expenses were paid through canceled checks or utility statements. So, sorry.
What if they didn't pay those? That's why they need the money.
Correct. They can, but they can just show the statements. We can have the invoices or a statement.
Okay.
If they, what we're looking at though, we're looking for the first quarter. So the only time that they might not have paid would have been March, but we're looking for what they paid because it's based on the first quarter of January through March. So that's what the actual fiscal costs are based on. So they should have probably been paid.
I think we can work with that.
All right, so the sample grant application, I have it up on the screen, but then I also have it in a format also included in your packet. And what I've done is I've highlighted in yellow the areas that are eligibility or qualifiers, and most of these will have some sort of a formula under it, behind it, so that the input is calculated in how the document moves forward. So as you note, we ask for the business name and information, the primary business contact. This email will be the one that we use to respond back to the applicant.
What about not accepting P.O. boxes as an address?
Well, we ask for the business address, and then on the second page, we ask for the mailing address.
Again, and they give you a P.O. box.
For the business address?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll put the business location.
Do you want a street address versus a P.O. box? That's my question. If you're looking for brick and mortar, you want an address.
And
if you don't put no P.O. boxes allowed, you're going to get P.O. boxes.
We'll make sure we add no P.O. boxes.
Every home-based business around.
Okay. No, thank you for pointing that out. We'll make sure. So one of the decision blocks is in what city is your business physically located. If somebody were to put Fort Worth in there, obviously, then that would kick it out to the ineligible pile. So as we go through, we have those decision boxes. Your business 51% or more minority, woman, or veteran owned? Yes or no? And yes answer will also move the application to another area.
What are you going to do when somebody doesn't want to tell you who all their owners are? Because there's a number of businesses where their owners do not want anybody to know that they own part of that company.
How would we know?
Don't.
What?
I didn't hear you.
Well, I guess you know.
If you look at right above where it says the 51%, it says the name include all owners or investors with 20% or more ownership.
Well, wouldn't that have to be registered with the Secretary of State? Anyway?
Maybe. Most of them. Some of them.
I'm not sure that you have to list all your owners. It said it was a partnership. It's probably going to be your general partner.
Yeah.
Do you really want to make a grant to some business that Ed Bass owns more than 20% of? That's what the purpose for this. If you don't care about that, then that's fine. But if any of the owners were very affluent, it would certainly reflect, I would think, questionably on why was that partner not being helped by their other partner.
I don't necessarily disagree, but again, we want? And if that's the case, then that's fine. We'll just disqualify anybody who doesn't give us.
This does not disqualify anybody. It is information. It can be used as, again, the one application per ownership or ownership group. So that's what this information's for.
It doesn't say it's not required. It says give me the names of all owners.
We want the information. I'm just saying that as far as it goes down, it doesn't disqualify anybody if we're taking them at their truthfulness. I mean, they're providing the information and they're certifying that this is the truth.
This funding is for companies that suffered a COVID-related business loss. Now, suffering that loss is independent of who owns the company.
Well, if that's the case, then everybody who said national chains aren't subject to that. And I mean, there's been very obvious examples of folks who got CARES funds money that they were encouraged to pay it back, or they were embarrassed.
That was a PR problem, not a public policy problem.
So you want our public policy to be that we give them money?
I want our public policy to be that we support local businesses that suffered a COVID-related loss.
So would you prefer that we just say name of business owner or owners and not put the qualifier of the 20% and let the applicant just list owners as they want, and as many as they, if there's more than one or two or somebody so small, we'll just let them answer the question to the best of their ability?
How did we come up with the 20% figure? How did we come up with the 20%?
That is the way that most of the applications that the other counties and cities are including information, and they're using the 20% figure. And I believe the SBA also looks at that also when they're looking at their applications.
I'd probably keep it in.
As long as it's informational, I don't care.
As we move down, we ask again about how many full-time equivalents. I'm sorry.
They don't have to fill it out
Correct.
if they don't want to.
We ask about how many full-time equivalents that were employed as of March 1st. And the reason we ask as of that date is because we were a little concerned that somebody might have actually been an employer that had over 50, and then they furloughed all their employees, and so then they are now applying because they have less than 25. And I think we wanted to actually work with the businesses that already were small businesses, not the ones who lost. So then we actually, and then because if somebody were to answer as of March 1st that they had greater than 25 full-time equivalents, then that would kick them over into the disqualified area also.
941 is going to tell you that.
And so then we do ask how many full-time employees that they currently employ, and that will give us just some indication, not that it's not a qualifier or anything, it'll just give us some indication of what the impact that this has had on their business and the loss of employees. And then this is important because of the guidelines under the use of the CARES Act funding. Was your business closed or partially closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic public health emergency? Yes or no? If no, it would kick it over to disqualified. And then here is where we ask about their revenue impact, and we ask them to provide the gross revenue for the January and February period, and then we'll ask them to provide the gross revenue for the April and May period. If they were not impacted, there are some businesses that actually were doing better during this. It could have been IT related that was actually helping other companies get up with technology. If that business shows an increase in revenue, then they would, for April, May, as opposed to January, February, they would not qualify and they would be kicked out. So then the other one is, as we've talked about, the payroll amount. They'll put the monthly payroll amount for average payroll of the quarterly first quarter, and then the same thing with the fixed cost. And we have delineated the different areas of the fixed cost, but then that monthly fixed cost area is what then will be multiplied by 2, and that we'll look at 2 times that monthly fixed cost or 1 times the payroll, and there will be a calculation under that will then say which one is greater, and then at the bottom it will show the maximum grant amount for which your business may be eligible, with the note that the actual award will be based on the availability of funds.
On the did we just leave March out because it's kind of in the no man's land?
Yes. And it's because some of the things started happening at that point, and that would kind of skew. So it looks, when things were all up and running, is January, February, and then when everything was really impacted, it was April and May. Because our actual first order, I think, wasn't until the end of March.
But shut down the restaurants on or about the 20th of March.
But social distancing had already kind of started toward then, and so some things had kind of started impacting at the end of March. So we're really looking at.
Well, if you don't think working 10 days or 10 days with no revenue, that's pretty strong.
And again, we're just, this is looking at, though, just showing the impact of the revenue, the two. We're just comparing the two. So April, May is going to actually show the greatest amount of loss for those businesses. And this is a comparison just for the point of showing that they were impacted with revenue loss. And then we have included, I know there was some discussion about whether a company received any type of other type of funding through federal funds, a loan or a grant. While it's not a disqualifier, we have added that question on here simply for data and just to kind of see how people are being assisted. There are still a lot of applications in the SBA EIDL grant program and PPP right now. So even when somebody puts in this grant application, they may find out afterward that they got loan funds. So it's not guaranteed whether they've gotten anything or not, but this will help us see how our businesses were benefiting from some of the federal programs. And then this is a certification that we are proposing that be used. It's been something similar has been done by Denton County and Williamson County, just certifying that what is being put in this application is true, acknowledging that all this information is subject to Open Records Act. And then we show, and it must be signed, it will be electronic signature. And then we have a checklist on of documents to be uploaded so that they have an idea and they can check off what is there when it's uploaded. I know that we will make sure that we put a disclaimer someplace on that time at that bottom page that shows that if these documents are not included in the application, that the application will be disqualified. I'll add that to that application. The auditor brought that up, and I think that was a good point that needs to be added. So, kind of a look at a business. I picked a business, ABC Company, located in North Richland Hills. So, yes, they are in Tarrant County, and they are in a city outside of Fort Worth. They do not check that they're a MWV ownership, and they note that they're a small retail clothing boutique with 4 full-time equivalent employees on March 1st, and they tell us they have 3 currently. They do check that they were closed due to COVID-19 restrictions, and then in the revenue boxes, they show they had $20,000 for January and February and gross revenues of $5,000 for April and May, so they would be qualified as a loss. And they indicate that they had a first quarter average monthly payroll of $7,500 and fixed cost of $4,500. Well, under this scenario, they will be eligible for a maximum of $9,000 in grants because 2 times the $4,500, it's $9,000, is greater than the 1 times the payroll, $7,500. So the $9,000 then would be put in the eligible block. That application then would be picked up from the auditor's office with that eligible grant amount already shown, and then they would be checking for the documentation to make sure it matches the application. And then again, the actual grant amount could be a percentage of that $9,000 based on the applications received and the funding available. So, moving forward, this is our projected timeline. Today, we are hoping to get consensus on this small business grant program. And then once we have that, we'll move forward with internal review of these guidelines and requirements with the auditor's office, our attorney, and our staff here, and then IT. And then next week, on June 2nd, we'll bring to you the 381 and approval of the program to grant the public funds. And our website will be then open from June 2nd through 14th with the application information. And then IT will be developing and testing the online application. And then during that time, we'll also be notifying of the program, promoting it to the cities, the chambers, social media, everywhere we can. The application would open on June 15th and be open for 10 days until June 24th. At that time, the auditor will be processing applications. And then we will come back, and hopefully by June 30th, that Tuesday, Commissioners Court, we will be able to bring to you a listing or amount of the qualified applications we had and let you know how much that is compared to our funding pool. And we can make a decision at that time how we spend those funds.
So I have a few questions. On the application, or at least on this printed copy, there are those that are highlighted in yellow.
Mhm.
What's that indication of? And if you said that, I missed it. So
Those are the indications of blocks that either there's some formula to that. So it's either a qualifier, yes or no, and it gets taken to a different pile, it gets disqualified, or it is a formula like in the monthly fixed cost and the payroll costs that will then be multiplied together and the greater of will be taken. So all of those are areas that impact how the application moves forward.
Lisa, I want to thank you and GK, y'all staff, because at 11 o'clock on Friday, none of this existed, okay?
And I want to thank Megan.
It was in your head.
And Megan South helped immensely also in getting this together for me and helping draft the application.
Y'all have done a splendid job, and in recognition of that, I will move approval of where we are so far so that we can continue to move forward.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Would you like to ask the rest of your questions?
I would. Thank you. There is some discussion. So I echo what's been said about the progress that we've made on this. And I know you and I have multiple conversations about a number of things. Some of those have been addressed and some of them kind of remain outstanding. I am really concerned about the outreach aspect of it because to your point, with Arlington being such a large city, and obviously the Greater Arlington Chamber has been doing a number of things to serve their membership at any business, and then Mayor Williams has formed a recovery task force. But that even with that good work being done, it still leaves out a lot of folks. And then, we haven't necessarily put in paper what commitments that we're going to make to reach business owners who perhaps English is not their first language. So I think we're going to have to rely on some of our chambers that have that expertise, but that needs to be laid out for me to feel good that we are doing everything that we can to reach as many businesses as possible. And that may mean, and I know you talked some about providing resources for businesses to upload their documents and things like that. In discussion last week, just in kind of getting a sense from business owners and leaders in Precinct 2, I talked with a mayor, and there was some concern about the fact that it was only online. And I can understand why it would be only online, because the documents need to be uploaded. We need to make sure that everything is put together. But I think that's going to be a crucial point for us to really make sure that we reach some of those businesses who don't have as much access as others, which we know obviously to run a legitimate business, there are some things that you just should have, but given the fact that everyone's affected by a global pandemic, there is, and the fact that we're doing this program shows that there's a resource shortage. So I remain concerned about those, and so I want to make sure that we really flesh that out some more, and certainly get some commitment from our chambers or the cities as to what they're willing to do to make sure that we're reaching, obviously, because their resources are limited as well. So
we'll be developing this week those contacts and getting some assurances. I think that's always a concern, but in order for this program to move forward like it is, we really have to do the online application. Sure. With that being said, if we can have people that are there to assist someone that doesn't maybe have the ability or is not real good at the computer, to help them with their documents and to put that information in. A lot of businesses, the only way we can file, most of them, sales tax information and things like that is online. So whether it's they have a bookkeeper or somebody that does their taxes for them, hopefully they have some assistance, but if not, we would like to provide centers, and I know the Small Business Development Center has said they are open to provide that assistance, and what we'd like to find those linkages and closer to the communities around our area.
And I think
we will
even
be working
access
on
to
those.
those professionals could be challenging, because what I heard from folks who were successful in receiving PPP funds, where they either had an established relationship with a banker or they were able to, get in with that banker as soon as possible. And there were others who, even though they had that relationship, they weren't able to get in time, right? So even if people had access to those professionals, they're probably all pretty wrapped up, obviously, because there's so many businesses right now in need.
So with the way that we've gone forward with the program, we have basically a 2-week pre-information time period.
Yeah.
And then we have another 10 days while the application is open. So there's over 3 weeks for a business to learn about this and get this in. And so nobody is put out of the funding pool because they don't get it in until the last day. So there's a time period, hopefully, that we can really get the assistance needed to any of those small businesses that can't access it.
And with the business owners that I talked to, they did share that they thought that was a reasonable amount of time. So that's good, especially if we're able to tell business owners up front, this is what's going to be required. That would give them, sufficient lead time to get those things together. So once the application is accessible, then they can, upload, submit, upload, and they're good to go.
We'll work closely with your staff, too, to find areas that will assist in getting the word out in that Arlington, Grand Prairie, Mansfield area.
I think you'll see, I know this is what I'm finding, and these guys all know, women and men, they all know each other that are in this economic development business for these cities, and I do a call every week with them, and a large number of them, and they're all, we've been talking about this for a couple of weeks.
Sure.
They're all willing to provide their people, and the chambers of commerce also, in helping people fill these, to do this if they can't do it themselves.
Yeah.
So
I will appoint a person in each one of my sub-courthouses that will be available to help persons with the transmission of documents online. I don't want to get into helping people assemble their applications. That's more expertise than we have available. But if somebody just needs to transmit their application and supporting documents, they can come to one of our sub-courthouses and get assistance in doing that.
Great.
I think that's a good timeline as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's all I have.
I'm good. We got a motion. And
No,
a
I've got to ask a couple of questions. I will tell you that throughout, and Lisa and I have had many discussions about this, some calm, some not so calm, that I am concerned that we, to some degree, tie the money that we give back to the amount of loss that the individual may have experienced, and that we don't end up in some instances giving more money than what they actually would have lost or did lose in the period of time that they were closed down, partially closed down, or whatever. So I do feel like we've got to, and as I said to Lisa, sometimes you just got to see it on paper. As you went through the presentation, one of the things we say on here, all eligible and qualified applications receive some amount of funding. We've gone through here and said some things are optional that they may affect. So I would be sure to take out the word all, because they could be eligible, but we could decide because they got more federal money than what we think they lost. And in that situation, we may not give them a grant. Well, there's a lot of things in here. I'm not gonna go through and do everything line by line, but to say again how difficult this can be at times. The example you gave was in a $2,000 loss a month position before they ever got to COVID-19. because you had gross revenues of $10,000 a month for January and February. Their first quarter payroll was $7,500 average monthly. So right there, they had $2,500 left, and their fixed costs were $4,500. So in effect, they were losing $2,000 a month before COVID-19 ever got here.
Raise their volume up, you'll solve your problem.
But I'm just saying, until we actually begin to see this, and I'm not asking for any more information. We've got everything. I say I'm not. I think I want.
So.
Just a second. I was partially quiet.
You did good.
I did good. From the interruption monitor over here. I do think that we say under fixed costs, profit and loss or other financial statements that show expenses, utility statements, bank statements, January, I think that should be through May 31st.
You're under a fixed cost documentation?
I'm under the sample thing here.
What page?
Yeah. Page 4 of the grant application. Last one. I mean, I think everything else, but for some reason we only wanted bank statements through March 31st, and I really believe that needs to be through May 31st.
Well, actually, on the documentation that's required, that would be they need to use that to show the bank statements are already required. Under required documentation, we have bank statements January through May 31st.
But you also say profit and loss. Profit and loss statements or financial statements that show expenses, utility statements, and bank statements. So if they got profit and loss statements, I want them through May 31st. I know we've already asked for the bank statements, but why not ask for everything they've got in those utility statements that show just March 31st to May 31st is not going to add, all it may add is 2 more profit and loss statements.
The reason that is there is because that is what we're asking them to put into this block for the monthly fixed cost is the average monthly fixed cost for the period January 1 through March 31. So that's why it just says first quarter there.
Okay, then I'll be happy if you'll just separate out profit and loss and make that statement January through May 31st. If they're going to give it and they've already got it, there's no reason not to ask for 2 more months.
I don't know that, to the point of what Commissioner Brooks has mentioned before, not everybody is going to be able to provide a profit and loss statement.
If they don't have it, then they're not going to get it. Well, and we'll use the bank statements at that point. Okay. Just, you're already asking for it, and you're asking for it through March 31st.
Why don't we, up here where we require documentation, can we put in their bank statements January 1st? Or profit and loss statements?
Documentation of impact to revenue, just put bank statements, and then below that put profit and loss statement, January, or other financial statements, January 1 through May 31. If they have it.
If available. I'll do that. Okay.
I think we're still.
I do have something else to add when you get finished.
I do think that we have got through the interpretation. That's why I want Guidehouse to do that. I am nervous that the Treasury regs continuously refer to business interruption expenses. And I think we've got to have something here that documents or that shows that we have something, and I'm not saying we test every one of them. Maybe we go back and do some random testing, but this is the group that is going to have the least amount of documentation if the government comes in and says, King's X, we're going to audit this, and if they don't have it, we're going to claw it back.
Yeah, actually, and I had a question about that. I missed it. So.
And so I really believe that we're going to have to do something that shows that we trained all the other governments. We've already said we're going to go out, we're going to tell them exactly what they have to put in. And I think we're going to have to at least collect some of that documentation that will help in that regard. Because if the federal government comes in and wants to see that, then we're going to be in a little bit more difficult position.
So to that point, and we kind of, as we discussed last Friday, there was a concern that if the amount of those fixed costs, that $9,000 we're granting, you were concerned that if we looked at the loss between those two and they only show a loss of $7,500 now, and we're giving them $9,000, that you felt like we were giving them more money than their loss at this point. And the use of these funds, these grant funds, are available under the CARES Act, and under this program we're proposing from March 1st through September 30th. So their losses can be incurred from the beginning, and for the majority of them, I imagine that those first 2 months, this grant is probably not even going to cover their losses. But in the instance, by chance, that we have somebody like you had kind of pointed out that actually did not have the same amount of loss as the amount they're given, they're still going to be impacted as in June, because it's taking time. They're still impacting throughout. They could be even impacted when we have another wave.
I would prefer for us to hold money back and do another one, because what it talks about is reimbursement of business caused by business interruption. And if we're doing it as of this day, I'd like to be able to say we've documented as of this day. And if the court wants to do something for after this period of time, then let's hold money back and give it out to them then, because I don't want to basically say, well, we just assumed that they were going to have that business interruption, and that's just where I'm at. I don't want, if they can't prove the business interruption in excess of $7,500, that's all I want to pay them. That's all I want to pay them. I understand you disagree with me.
I'm just saying that the way the application process is going through, that's not a qualification. We ask about their revenue impact, and that's a disqualification if the revenues in April and May are greater than the revenues in January, February. But other than that, we don't look at their losses to determine how the impact is on the amount of the grant amount. And we kind of discussed this, that the out for your concern about the federal government coming back is that in the off chance somebody was $500 short on that shortfall, they have the ability, if the auditor has to go back and audit that person, they can show that I still had losses and it's still made up further on.
What if they had a great June and it went up and it wiped out all the losses for April and May? It's not. That's what I'm just saying. I don't want to go forward and try to assume what's going to happen. Let's look at what happened.
Judge, we can't, in order to make this program go and make it as simple as possible, I think is what with the goal of everyone in mind was to go forward like this. And this is a program that Denton County is using, the same type of calculations, and we felt that this was a way to move forward. And I thought we were all on the same page. That's probably how we were going to.
Exactly the same program that Denton County is using, because Denton County is paying for 7 weeks and we're not. Denton County is not going forward to look at things. They're looking only from the date back, and they're only paying for 7 weeks. We're only talking about paying for a month. So they are not going forward.
So would it be beneficial? We understand the question.
And
and would it be beneficial if we simply checked with Guidehouse to see if, in fact, the type of strategy that we're suggesting here, even though it covers a little bit more than their actual expenses,
maybe
if it's eligible for the CARE Act? Is that something you would like for us to find out?
I don't want to pay forward, because if we're going to pay forward, then we're going to have to audit forward. Because we've now given money out that we can't be sure just reimbursed for business interruptions.
We're giving money based on their expenses to be used because of business interruption. And we have that the program period for the use of these funds is March 1st through September 30th. That's why the program period is in there. We're basing it on those fixed costs that they have for 2 months, but it can be used to recover those fixed costs, those losses, and those fixed costs going forward during this time period. As I said, I imagine that a majority of the funds probably won't even cover the fixed costs or the payroll for the 2 months.
Then let's take those that it does and look at them and determine whether we want to reimburse, go forward in the future. Denton County is doing 3 phases. We're talking about, I think, 1. Maybe we have subsequent ones that come in. This is the area that I feel like we're most exposed to the federal government coming in and clawing back money.
We will check with Guidehouse and get their reaction. They have been given a draft of this, and they haven't indicated that was a problem, but we will check with them on that.
I think if a business shows a loss of revenue, typically they're going to have a loss of employees. That's a negative a negative cause to their operation, and that should satisfy if they, if those costs are valid.
And I don't disagree with that a bit. We're reimbursing at that point in time for a cost, but we don't know what's happening now that everything is opened back up or is beginning to open back up. That barber or that hairdresser may be making the same amount of money now, and we're anticipating.
Well, he may be, but he lost his tail for May, April, and March, and I think I don't get why we're eliminating March, but
I don't either. I agree with you on that, but if they lost their tail, we're going to give them as much as we can give them.
Correct, but they're going to show us that they've lost money.
But she's asking for, if they show us that they haven't lost as much money as they're asking for, she's wanting to pay them more and assuming that they're going to show that they've lost money in the future.
I don't see how we pay anything forward.
We're not asking for a profit and loss in terms of, we are not reviewing and doing the calculations to figure a loss. That is not the way the application.
3 people say that they don't want to pay forward.
I don't want to pay forward past, I would say, the end of May. Because, you're not going to, this application's due whenever the 15th, that's whatever date you can start putting them in,
So there's one
Do you want
way,
to check?
there may be a way then, if you go ahead and rather than, in the example that Ms. McMillan gave us, we showed where that you took the greater of either one-time payroll, average payroll in quarter, or 2 times average fixed cost. I'm trying to pull that up. And if you take the lesser of those 2, then you're going to partially reimburse them for their expense if you take the lesser rather than the greater of those 2.
Just remember that company was losing $2,000 a month before we
Well, that doesn't count because that's not a real company, and no offense, but
that was my mistake.
Your mistake, exactly. Okay.
Would you feel better if we put the program period for the use of funds as September is March 1st through June?
No,
30th?
through May 31st.
Okay. All right, then we'll put that down.
And revise your numbers on your example. Okay, because if he caught it, there'll be one other one that'll catch it. Somebody out there, at least one.
So based upon a program through May 31st, which I thought was what we had here anyway, I amend my motion to include that clarification.
I amend my second, and I have a discussion item.
Go right ahead.
I would like for us to explore, after I had a discussion with Andy Eads, chief of staff, basically. Judge Andy Eads in Denton County. His chief of staff, on their program that they've already implemented, I think it would at least possibly benefit us to look into the possibility of utilizing the program that they use through CoServe, which for them was being done at no cost. Now, CoServe, I think, is a company based in their county.
Don't know that for sure, but the
I think
area
that's
code
their own
applies.
electric co-op that became everything.
We have reached out to them,
Yes,
and we
I know you have.
and we actually heard back after I talked to you this morning. So we will explore those options, and what that will do is basically could provide an avenue for us when we hit apply now. The actual application would rest on the CoServe website, and it is a little bit more sophisticated in how the application can be worked, and somebody can go online and save it and then come back. The way that it's going to happen on our website is most likely there's not a way to do that. You'll have to do everything at one time. So that was one of the thoughts, and if we can do that in our timeline, which they think they may be able to, we're exploring that option now. Our IT would still set up the information and FAQs. We'll have that on our website. It would just be that the link to apply would take us to another site, and we need to talk to them about how that would then be. The auditor's office would access those folders and for the qualifications and all. But we're exploring that.
Well, Shannon Josky, who again works with Andy, Judge Eads, and she said that, she is a technology IT person and has been since she's never seen a program work so smooth as that one worked for what they were doing. It was totally seamless. It took them 1 hour, but basically to go through it and get it going.
And it keeps them out of our firewall. It keeps all these applicants from getting inside of our area to work.
And it would hopefully keep them from our system from possibly crashing too.
Because you're going to have a few people that are going to access it.
If that's a simpler, easier way to go, then sure.
I mean, it may not work, but I think we ought to look at it.
So in any case, it's not a part of the motion on the table.
And I would like to ask if you would include it. That we look into it.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will include that we look into it.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, and we'll make the changes
Lisa,
requested.
thank you very much for your hard work, because again, I know you spent a great deal of time doing that. Your job. Are we still on?
You got an Aggie hat under your table?
No. Yeah, I might have an Aggie hat. Yeah, that one didn't get stolen. I don't know if I got an Aggie hat under there.
That's our resident Aggie.
I do have a red hat under there that I'm going to throw away.
A&M's color is not red.
It's called. I know, that's why I'm not going to throw away that one.
Exactly.
Hi, GK. How are you?
There it is.
I'm great.
There you go.
There you go.
That was enough.
She got it.
Okie dokie.
By the way, on this PowerPoint that you just saw, the time I received it was 12:47 a.m. this morning. So Lisa was working at it, and Megan was helping her, and they worked all weekend on it. So, Lisa, you guys did a great job.
Did a very good job.
Thank you.
Okay, so we can go to item number 5. I just wanted to give you an update as to where we are and some of the things we've talked about as far as regulations, you might remember that last week you all enacted a regulation on social distancing, which we have implemented. We're seeing that the lines in the sub-courthouses are very manageable, and that seems to work very well. We did have a call on Friday with other elected officials. I believe some of you were on that call. I just want to let you know that I'm going to give them a memo probably tomorrow and ask them to see if they would voluntarily ask their staff to wear masks also, voluntarily ask. Because listening to the health scientists, the two most effective ways of preventing the spread of this is social distancing and the wearing of masks. Also, on this particular item, we will be coming to you next week with some internal approaches on what happens if one of your employees comes down and how you should manage your employees if you have someone who's been exposed and also might expose other members of your workforce. So that'll be something we will be bringing to you next week, and that'll be a discussion that we'll be having with public health and the health authority. You might remember that part of the motion that you all approved was to authorize the county administrator to work with the health department to come up with additional rules and regs. So that's what we're doing. So
before you get happy about the lines, let's see what happens the last week of the month and the first week of the next month.
Sure.
Because those are our stress points.
Yeah, we knew, when we first opened up again on the 18th, we experienced some lines. And we thought that was pent-up demand, but we watch those lines almost every day. So that's what we're doing on that particular one. Now, if we can go to item number 6. Remember, one of our 4 pillars was to provide funding with our partners. The Commissioners Court approved the $55 per capita for our municipalities. We sent those ILAs out last week. The total amount that was available for distribution was $61,308,720. We're requesting that the Commissioners Court, we've received back 4 ILAs from 4 cities now. We're requesting that the Commissioners Court approve an interlocal agreement with the cities of Arlington, Bedford, Grand Prairie, and Haltom City as it relates to the distribution of COVID funds, and authorize the county auditor to release funds after the full execution of the agreement.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
By the way, out of that $61 million with the action you all took, we have distributed 48% of all of those funds. So I have one more item on my agenda, and that's item number 11. Mr. Hyder is here also.
We break for just a second. Calm down, Chris. We're all right. I'd call out Commissioner Johnson, but he'd say yes, and then I'd have him for the next vote. Mr. Manius, let's continue.
Okay, so if we can go to item number 11 under the administrator section. First of all, there's nothing wrong with this attached resolution to accept the grant award. And so we're going to ask the Commissioners Court to approve the resolution and accept a grant award from the Office of Secretary of State for the HAVA emergency funds, and which were made available to the state. And now this is a direct allocation to Tarrant County, which is $1.764 million. If we could get a motion and then a second, and then I have a discussion point.
I'll move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
So the elections is going to eventually come to the court with a budget as it relates to the total breakdown on those expenditures. We're still working on that. This is simply to acknowledge to the state that we want to accept this 1.7. And our budgets will go up to an amount of $1.7 million.
Is this money to send absentee voting applications to everybody?
You know, Mr. Garcia is here today and would like to address the court.
Great.
Now, and I want you to recall that we did have a question earlier about the HAVA funds, so I know that you've got some thoughts in that regard, to the extent that, wait a minute, is that, well, my question becomes, though, she asked a question about that, but I don't know whether that's covered by the item on our agenda, and if it's not, then he can't speak to it.
It is covered because all she asked was for a breakdown of those funds.
Okay.
And that's the budget piece that we spoke of just a second ago.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Hi,
Okay, so as GK was saying, the grant is for that amount. We have to match 20% to get the full amount. The good news is the Secretary of State said we can use what is known as Chapter 19 funds. That's another grant that the state gives us every year. And we have enough funds to match it. So we can basically pull down $2.1 million to spend on COVID-related expenses for the upcoming elections, including expenses back in March, starting March 28th. So things we've done during this time to build up our stock of PPE and sanitizer and that sort of products, that would also be covered by this. It's not a reimbursement grant. We're going to get the full money deposited, and what we have to do at the end of it in November is send back any unused money with an expense report. So we have to be working really close with the Secretary of State to make sure that every time we're going to spend something, they're okay with it, and we don't have a surprise at the end saying that was a qualified expense, if you will.
Well, so my question was going to be what strings are attached, but that's somewhat connected to Commissioner Brooks's question about can it be used for vote by mail applications, which I know that that's being tossed all about in the court system right now, but can it be used for that?
If a voter calls us and says, I'd like to have an application, we sometimes mail it to them. So I don't see why not. But I would definitely pose a question in writing to the state to make sure.
The question is whether or not we've got enough applications to mail one to everyone who might write in and ask for one with a COVID-related reason.
So that's a question that's been asked to the state in some of the conference calls I've been on. And what they've said, the legal director, is the only criteria that we know without a doubt is the age. If you're over 65, they've told EAs on those calls there shouldn't be an issue because it can't be seen as encouraging someone who may or may not be eligible. Disability is something we have no way to verify or determine. So choosing to send it to someone falls into a gray area. Age is the only one we could, without a question, know. You're definitely over 65. You're definitely eligible for one.
For right now.
For right now.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm just to make sure, what was the question, the exact question earlier? Did I answer it?
If there was a kind of how you were planning on using the HAVA funds.
So the draft I have of what I intend to, or what I'd like to spend it on, is mostly preparing for an increased volume of absentee ballots. Political discussion aside, it's just there are a lot of people over 65 at least who don't use it, and we think they may be using it. There are also people who maybe are living outside of the county taking care of relatives. I'm in Denton and Colin, and I'm in another state taking care of my parents. I'm eligible for a ballot by mail, and I usually wouldn't do it. So a lot of these expenses, as we have them on paper right now, are to make sure we upgrade our infrastructure for a possible higher volume of it, including more stations for the ballot board, more room for them to work, because we would need more ballots going out, more people to review them coming back in, and more space to store them, and faster equipment to process a higher amount of ballots to still meet the deadlines, because those are not in discussion of being reviewed. We still have to count this by the Senate.
That you're looking possibly at would be, we're going to have to move on that fairly quickly in order to be able to get that in we're not going to be able to get it in for the July election.
I don't know.
Runoff.
Not the
But
big
we
equipment.
might be able, but we may be able to get it in for the November general election, which is when we will have the significant increase in, I would suspect, in mail-in ballots, depending upon what the courts decree.
And what was that piece of equipment?
Right. In that plan, the bigger, the most expensive item is a high-speed ballot sorting or envelope sorting machine, and I've worked with those in the past. What I recall, the contract for that one in the old county was around $300,000, and it's a machine that you can just put 10,000 envelopes lined up, and it'll scan them, picture them, send the data, and process them really quick, which right now we do on a very manual, with a very manual process. We grab envelopes, we put them in a scanner, then we grab those images and we go to a computer and we put them in the system, and then we push them. So it would just allow us to say what we're doing in 3 hours of work, we can probably do in 30 minutes, and so on.
So GK, we'll get an update though, like a fuller update from Hyder on the runoff and all of that at a near future point?
Yes.
Okay.
But now with regards to the runoff, and you may be going to have covered that next. Are you going to cover that next?
Yeah. Were there any other questions for Hyder?
There's a motion.
There's a motion and a second. And I want to have a brief conversation with you as soon as if you would vote on that motion first.
Any other discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
So the question became, as it relates to elections, and is whenever we have elections, sometimes we also conduct municipal elections. And so the runoff is one that we're required to do anyway, but I believe Fort Worth is the only municipality that has another election out there that we actually do the elections for. And then the question became, how much do we charge Fort Worth for that? You might remember, I guess several months ago, we had this conversation about all the different cities, and the decision of the Commissioner's Court at that time was that we would charge them every city a $5 fee, plus there was a $75 fee that's a mandatory fee on top of that. And so we're not asking you to take a formal vote today. We're just asking you for some direction if you would want to maintain that fee schedule, at least for the July 15th runoff.
Why would we not? That's what we voted.
The first one was for the previous election, and all we want to make sure is that you want to continue that for the July 15th. That's all we're asking, so we can move forward with those contracts. Yeah. And I'm not asking.
Is that it's the 22nd, isn't it? Or is that vote on the 15th or the 22nd?
When's the runoff?
July
14th.
You were closer.
Is that early voting, or is that when the actual voting done?
That's actual voting, isn't it? That's actual voting.
That's actual voting.
Yeah.
So you back into it's like a week. Is that a Tuesday election?
Yes.
It is?
Yeah.
So the week before, 1 week of early voting?
2. The governor expanded it 2 weeks. We start June 29.
Okay.
June 29.
And then we exclude July 4th, right?
Correct. The schedule's up on the website, but yeah, July 3rd and 4th, we won't have early voting, the Friday and Saturday, because it's a federal holiday. It's a state-recognized holiday.
What does the city of Fort Worth have on the ballot?
Crime
Control District.
Oh.
That's the only information we needed, and that's why I had actually pulled this off, so we would have subject matter on the agenda to discuss. That's all of our section, Your Honor.
Ms. Tidwell.
We're requesting that the court approve the release of collateral of the $10,001,000 as outlined in your court communique.
Move for approval.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes. Yes.
That's good.
Motion passes unanimously.
Move to receive and file personnel agenda.
Second.
We have motion and second to receive and file the personnel agenda. Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Chris?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Your Honor and court members. We have one item for your consideration this morning. It is requested that the Commissioners Court approve the Odyssey Courts and Justice API, a toolkit software license, including maintenance and support with Tyler Technologies.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Any discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Beecham?
We have three items for your consideration this morning. Our first item is a bid award recommendation for bid 2020-146, sale of recycled paper. Recommendation be to award a per enterprise basis awarding to the high bidder. Ecofiber be purchasing our cardboard at $145 per ton. Evergreen Fiber Sales, our office paper at $209.27 a ton. Our ledger at $280.15 a ton.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Any discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Yes.
That's for the next one. Motion passes unanimously.
Item number two, another bid award recommendation for bid 2020-073. It's a bid for the Criminal Justice Building, elevator replacement, and general contractor renovations. Recommendation be to award to Kone, amount of $330,930. Approval seeking contract approval, acceptance of the payment, and the performance bond.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Last item number three, also a bid award recommendation for RFP 2020-089, signing a contract for aerial application of pesticides for mosquito control. Recommendation be to award per the terms of the contract. Selecting as our primary vendor, Vector Disease Control International. Our secondary vendor, Clark Environmental Mosquito Management.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yep.
Motion passes unanimously. Sheriff? Nope. David?
Judge, Commissioners, we have one item for your approval. It's the ratification of a grant through the Department of Homeland Security and Justice Department for human trafficking. It would allow us to partner with Homeland Security, the United States District Attorney's Office, and Unbound Fort Worth to enhance our Human Trafficking Act program.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. How long is this?
It's a three-year program.
And the $900,000 is the 25% match for the whole time frame?
The $900,000 is what we would receive. The 20% match would be $75,000 a year, and that would be made up through current salaries that we already have.
Okay.
Is the district attorney's office part of this deal also? Are they going to be doing the prosecution, or is it going to be the feds that do the prosecution?
It's probably going to be both, depending on where and the type of arrests that are made. Right now, currently the district attorney is very strong with regard to our human trafficking task force and prosecuting people, so we don't expect that to change.
I knew the feds would prosecute a lot of these also. So, okay.
Any other discussion? Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yep.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Are there any appointments? Being none, then you have before you the claims, including the addendum.
Move approval of the claims, including the addendum.
Second.
We have a motion second to approve the claims, including the addendum. Please vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Yep.
Motion passes unanimously. We've already done the briefing items. We have a few people who want to speak to us today. First is Guillermo Gomez. Palermo, this is Judge Whitley. You have asked to speak before the court today, and I'm calling you at this time for your comments. You have 3 minutes. Please give your name and your address, and then you have 3 minutes to make your comments.
Thank you, Judge. My name is Guillermo Gomez, and I live at zip code 76106, Precinct 4. And I'm calling to tell the court that I'm against the 287G program in Tarrant County. I don't think that local law enforcement should be enforcing immigration laws. They should be focusing on enforcing laws that will protect people. I think it leads to fear in immigrant communities and gets in the way of law enforcement and building good relationships with the police. I also think that right now with COVID-19, the county should be focusing its time and money with getting people back on their feet, not doing ICE's job. I urge everyone on the Commissioner's Court to please end the 287G program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a good day. Next will be Luis Herrera.
Hello?
Is this Luis Herrera?
Yes, it is.
You had asked to speak to the court today. Now is that time, and so please repeat your name, your address, and you have 3 minutes for comments.
Oh, I apologize. I submitted it. I thought they were going to be read. So I don't have my comments in front of me. My name is Luz Herrera.
No, unfortunately, I don't either. Okay, you found it? Okay, good.
Can you go on to the next person and come back to me? Because I submitted my comments to be read in the court, and I have to find them on my computer.
Okay, thank you. We will call you back in just a few minutes. Jonathan Gooderun. I should know this because I've said it before. Guardian.
Hello?
Jonathan, this is Judge Whitley. You had asked to speak to the court today. Please repeat your name, your address, and then you have 3 minutes to make any comments you wish to make.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Guadian. I live in 3325 Martin Street, Fort Worth, Texas 76119. Today I was with the Commissioner's Court regarding the 287G agreement. As of May 25th, Tarrant County ranks number 5 among the top 5 counties in Texas with the diagnosis among inmates, and 5 counties that is actively.
You're cutting out, Jonathan. I don't know if you're.
Is this better?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. As of May 25th, Tarrant County ranks number 5 among the top 5 counties in Texas with the most COVID-19 positive diagnosis among inmates. And Tarrant County is the only county in this list of top 5 counties in Texas that is actively engaged in a 287G agreement. Also yesterday, Tarrant County reported its first COVID-19 related death among inmates currently held within Tarrant County Jail. It is becoming more and more apparent that our already overwhelmed jail system cannot afford to spend more time and resources on any matters besides addressing COVID-19 in our jails and communities. And yet, Tarrant County continues to engage itself in an agreement with ICE, who have already reported at least 3 deaths among their own detainees from COVID-19. This 287G agreement is a baseless, racist program that continues to divert county resources towards a program that is only serving to further Sheriff Wayborn's political agenda. Every week I repeat some of the same pieces of information, and I will continue to do so because it is my obligation as a resident of Tarrant County to remind our commissioners that Sheriff Wayborn has yet to release any accurate information on how 287G is costing our county since its adoption in 2017. Sheriff Wayborn has yet to prove any factual evidence, if it can even exist, proving how 287G is making Tarrant County safer. Sheriff Wayborn continues to endanger all of Tarrant County's communities by choosing to not suspend the 287G agreement, like how Washington County Sheriff in Arkansas has already done, based on the goal to prioritize all county resources and focus on their fight against COVID-19. Sheriff Wayborn justifies his upholding of 287G in Tarrant County using empty words and racist rhetoric. What he continues to fail to understand is that his political agenda is destroying tax-paying communities in Tarrant County and most recently contributing to people's deaths in Tarrant County Jail. For these reasons and so many more that we have mentioned and will continue to mention until we see an actual response, the coalition I Set Up Tarrant demands that the Tarrant County Commissioners Court votes no on the continuation of 287G in June. The communities of Tarrant County deserve so much better. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
I will.
Okay, I'm now going to try Luis back.
Hello.
Hi there, this is Judge Whitley again. Now let me ask this question. I have some printed comments from a Cindy Mata, and you don't know her, and y'all aren't calling in together. Is that correct?
No, and I have my comments ready. So
Okay, I apologize for not having those, but if you would please go ahead, and you have 3 minutes.
Sure. This is Luz Herrera, and I just wanted to say that in this time of economic and social upheaval, it is important to direct resources on matters related to economic recovery and public health. In my opinion, neither of these issues is addressed by continued immigration enforcement through an agreement facilitated by 287G. First, immigration enforcement is the federal government's responsibility, not states or local governments. By dedicating county funds to this activity, the county is shortchanging its residents by reallocating funds to more relevant activities that can reinvigorate the local economy and protect public health. Second, it is not a criminal activity to overstay a visa or to be in this country without legal status. Instead of using our police resources to tear apart families, the county should be focused on responding to the increasing number of domestic violence incidents that are not only impacting adults, but they're impacting the many children who end up in foster homes or worse, at Cook's Children's Hospital dead. Finally, immigrants are and have been an important part of our economic growth in this country and the state. We are a nation of immigrants. Some came here voluntarily and others were forced here through economic pressures. Whatever the story is behind each of our immigrant family experiences, what is supported by numerous studies is that immigrants contribute more than drain our communities. Continuing to support xenophobic policies, such as 287G agreements, only drives our community apart. What we need is forward-thinking policies and politicians that help us garner a safer and more economically viable county. County agreements for immigration enforcement are not forward-thinking. They are reactive, driven by fear, and destructive for the well-being of our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
You too.
Next is Cindy Mata on Fry Street in Fort Worth. She asked me or she sent her comments in, so I'll read them into the record. My name is Cindy Mata. I reside in zip code 76115, precinct 4. I'm calling today as a member of ICE out of Tarrant to urge you to investigate important legal limits and potential legal liabilities stemming from Tarrant County's enforcement of ICE detainer requests for detainees through the voluntary 287G agreement. We want to ensure that you are aware of how compliance with detainer requests may violate individuals' constitutional rights and endanger the community, especially under the ongoing public health crisis. We ask that you prioritize using local resources to address community needs related to COVID-19 over cooperating with ICE and honoring immigration holds. Tarrant County may be subject to liability for holding an individual on a detainer that violates the Fourth Amendment, such as detainer based solely on federal database searches. We have seen lawsuits in places such as Las Vegas for continuing to hold immigration requests without probable cause. The Fourth Amendment governs seizure and arrest. Tarrant County must ensure that this basic constitutional principle is not disregarded and that any arrest, including an ICE detainer, complies with the Fourth Amendment. In addition, Tarrant County must also ensure that they do not unlawfully detain someone based on an ICE detainer that does not meet Fourth Amendment requirements. It is well established that holding someone on an ICE detainer after they would otherwise have been released from criminal custody constitutes warrantless arrest and must be supported by probable cause. However, in February 2020, Gonzalez versus ICE, a recent federal lawsuit found ICE violated the Fourth Amendment by issuing detainers based solely on information from its own databases. Therefore, the court held that the ICE databases are inadequate and unreliable to provide probable cause for arrest. This means that holding someone on an ICE detainer violates Fourth Amendment if the detainer was issued based only on federal database searches. Lastly, Tarrant County should not hold someone on a valid detainer request beyond 48 hours, even if that period or ends during a weekend or holiday. The 48 hours period begins when the individual would otherwise be eligible for release under state law. ICE cannot add additional detainers beyond the initial one to extend the 48-hour period. Therefore, any period beyond 48 hours is illegal and violates the individual's constitutional rights. This means that the county would be liable for individual unlawful detention. In light of the current pandemic, holding someone beyond the 48-hour period is irresponsible and inhumane. The risk it poses could be deathly. First death of a Tarrant County jail inmate to die from COVID-19 was reported yesterday. People are dying in Tarrant County Jail. ICE out of Tarrant demands that Tarrant County Sheriff's Department and the Commissioner Court act immediately to ensure public safety and public health protection of our Tarrant County community. This means accountability, oversight, transparency from the Sheriff's Department to ensure that unlawful detention does not occur and that the 287G agreement is terminated. More than ever, it is imperative that Tarrant County Commissioners Court take appropriate steps to make sure that the county does not violate Fourth Amendment or detain an individual subject to a detainer beyond the 48-hour period. Tarrant County could be subject to liability, financial responsibility. We ask again that you seek the truth and that you prioritize county resources and community needs in order to protect people's health and safety. And again, I am reading that as information turned in by Cindy Matra, who chose not to want to read it herself. That is all of the public comments that I have at this time. So with that, we will recess our open meeting and proceed to close to discuss items mentioned under 551.071, 072, 074, 076, and 087 of the Texas Government Code. They hear it, they come running. Having returned from our closed session, there being no business to conduct at this time, we stand adjourned.